Clerk, kindly proceed to call the first order.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair.
I would like to acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's Gallery this morning, a visiting delegation of members from the Kilifi County Assembly and the Secretariat, who are members of the Ad Hoc Committee on the Investigation of Shakahola Massacre in Ad Ward, Kilifi County. The delegation is in the Senate for 5 days to hold meetings and present their recommendations to their counterparts in the Senate. I request each member of the delegation to stand when called out so that you may be acknowledged in the Senate tradition. The Honorable Benson Ngirani, the Vice Chairperson. Honorable Mariam Mukumbi. Honorable Emmanuel Changawa. Honorable Paul Kitao. Honorable Samson Zia. Honorable Ronald Mbura. Ms. Charity Mwambura, Mr. Shauri Nyule, Mr. Harold Sifa, Mr. Justin Amani Karabu, Mr. George Kumbatha, Ms. Linda Nyamwata. In our usual tradition of receiving and welcoming visitors to Parliament, I extend a warm welcome to them, and on behalf of the Senate, on my own behalf, I wish them a fruitful engagement. I will allow the majority leader under 1 minute to welcome the delegation.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I join you in welcoming the visiting honorable members from the Kilifi County Assembly and Kilifi County generally, who are in this house for a very important exercise that one of the committees of this house is undertaking. That's public inquiry or hearings into the very unfortunate happenings at Shakahola. Mr. Speaker, I hope that these local leaders will be able to give the proper perspective from the local community on where the misses were and how perhaps one of the worst tragedies of this nature to ever befall this country happened, Mr. Speaker. It will be important, Mr. Speaker, to get their views on who they strongly feel let this country down, Mr. Speaker. I think the last I saw in the news, Mr. Speaker, we were drawing close to 400 lives that were lost, Mr. Speaker, and it's unfathomable that such massive loss of life can happen in our country with so many government agencies having their presence in Kilifi County, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, it will be good to hear their perspective, their presentation before the committee, and all that they wish to be done so that this never happens again in our country. So I welcome the members from Kilifi County Assembly. I wish them a fruitful stay, and may we benefit from their knowledge and insight into this particular unfortunate incident. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next order, clerk.
Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, questions and statements.
Now, honorable senators, we had lined up 3 CSs for purposes of responding to questions from senators. But during a sitting yesterday at the SBC, we received a letter from the Minister CS in charge of labor indicating that he will be accompanying His Excellency the President to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and therefore he indicated that he will not be able to be present today for purposes of responding to question number 20. We had therefore then hoped that the 2 CSs, that is the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora, the CS in charge of health, would be present today for purposes of responding to question number 18 and question number 19. However, I'm informed by the Secretariat that last night we did receive 2 letters from the 2 CSs indicating that they will be unable to attend this session today. Now we have given instructions to the Secretariat to respond to those letters, but as we do that, I'm afraid we may not be able to proceed with this session because none of the CSs are present today for purposes of responding to these questions. And therefore, we will have to move to the next order as we write to the CSs, and more particularly engaging the Prime Cabinet Secretary, because certainly this is behavior that as an institution we are not going to tolerate. If indeed a CS is unable to attend such a session, courtesy demands that the right to the Senate in good time so that the Senate can rearrange its business. Writing to the Senate a few hours to its sitting shows discourteous, and certainly as an institution we're not going to tolerate that. So, honorable senators, we may not be able to prosecute Order 7. We will move to Order 8 in the order paper. Yes, Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I stand guided by your decision, but it will be wrong if, as a House, we don't make... I just want to bring to your attention something, Mr. Speaker, that this is conduct unbecoming on the part of the 2 cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Appearance before Parliament is not a privilege, it's not something that you joke about with. While I appreciate that perhaps CS Nakumincha and CS Alfred Mutua have never served in Parliament and therefore maybe are struggling to understand the importance and the standing of this House, Mr. Speaker, what they have done this morning is grossly out of order. And they must be told so in no unequal terms, Mr. Speaker. You cannot write to an institution barely a few hours before they are sitting to inform them of a travel, I don't know to which part of the world, traveling to whatever part of the country, accompanying whoever, including the President, Mr. Speaker, is not the business of this House. What we have in this House, Mr. Speaker, is business that has been brought by the people of Kenya through their representatives. We are not calling the 2 CSs, Mr. Speaker, to engage them in idle talk. These are issues that the representatives of the people feel need to be answered, Mr. Speaker. And many of these questions, you know, Mr. Speaker, have been on the order paper for quite a while. I would certainly want to believe, Mr. Speaker, that Nakumincha and Alfred Mutua did not just realize last night that they were traveling out of the country and they are supposed to appear before their Senate. They knew this for weeks. What was so difficult in doing, as Mr. Speaker, you will recall, because you and I serve in SBC, and many of the members that are in Senate Business Committee know that there are CSS that wrote early in advance and said, please readjust my appearance because for one reason or the other. And we had such cabinet secretaries, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I think we received a letter from the CS from Labour who informed us in good time, and therefore, as a House, we were able to plan and reschedule their appearance. But to write to this House, Mr. Speaker, barely 12 hours before our sitting to tell us that you're not appearing because you're globetrotting, Mr. Speaker, that cannot be taken kindly, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, even as you direct the Secretariat, Mr. Speaker, to write to these 2 CSs, you must express the displeasure of this House to them, Mr. Speaker. This is totally unacceptable. It needs to be firm. It needs to be decisive. They need to be put in the know, Mr. Speaker, to know that this House did not take kind to their appearance. In fact, on the day that they eventually appear here, Mr. Speaker, they should certainly not be allowed to answer any question before they first apologize to this House, Mr. Speaker, for wasting our time, Mr. Speaker. This is not proper, and this is not what is expected of a cabinet secretary who's serving in this administration, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, from the floor of this House, we want to tell CS Nakumincha, CS Alfred Mutua, that you are grossly out of order. Behave yourselves properly next time. Write to Parliament in good time. because Parliament does not work out of idleness, Mr. Speaker. These are issues that we say or we present before this House on behalf of the people that send members to this House, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Senator Boni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I would like to join the leader of the majority in registering our disapproval and disappointment of this unbecoming behavior. Mr. Speaker, there is the Powers and Privileges Act, which allows a minister to fail to honor this kind of invitation. And the condition is very clear that it is only with the leave of the president. So because the Minister for Labor remembered that, she informed it at House Business Committee, which was quite okay. We don't care that Alfred Mutua, minister, and Susan Nakhumicha, minister, are greenhorns in serving the executive, never having found their way into this parliament. They might not be knowing the import of these issues. Mr. Speaker, the catchword is Parliament, not Senate or National Assembly. I therefore request you to liaise with your counterpart in the National Assembly so that Parliament takes a position that any minister who does not honor an invitation will lose the opportunity of business from their ministries being processed in Parliament until such a time that they convince us that they are apologetic. There are so many Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, who are dying to serve this country as ministers. If people want to have joy riders, let them have those joy riders outside Parliament, outside the executive. The country requires to be pushed so that we can deliver where we are. We cannot do it when we have people who take trips as a priority to transacting government business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kavendu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Naomba niende on record na wenzangu kuhusu hii tabia ya CSs. Bwana Speaker, hata kwa committees tuko na challenges kubwa sana. Kuna CS wa Treasury, tumemuita amekosa kuja kwa committee 5 times. Na kila wakati anasema ana shughuli. Hiyo shughuli yako nayo kubwa kuliko kuserve wananchi wa Kenya ni gani? Na sasa nilikuwa nafikiri ni kwa committees tu peke yake. Sasa hata mbele yako Bwana Speaker wanaleta tu huu mzaa. Hii iwe ni funzo kwa wale wengine. Hawa wachukuliwa hatua kali kabisa na CSs wajue wana jukumu ya kuja na kujibu maswali ya mambo ya wananchi. Kwa sababu Bwana Speaker, kama wewe tunamuita kwa sababu ya retired teachers who have not even wale ambao hawajapata benefits zao. Bwana Speaker, tunakuomba chukua hatua kali pamoja na secretariat ya Senate hii ndio iwe funzo na wajue kwamba hatuchezi kuja kukaa hapa. Hata sisi hii ni kazi kama hiyo yao pia. Na wanastahili kutupa heshima kama vile wanapatiwa heshima kule wako. Asante Bwana Speaker.
Senator Tabitha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to support my leaders led by the ML in this shameful, very shameful contact by our ministers. The president has clearly stated in this country that the ministers should appear before Parliament. These ministers should know that they're not appearing before us as individuals. They are appearing before us because our key and first mandate in this country is what we call representation. We are the representatives of the people in this country. And when a whole minister who has an office that knows very well that he should be able to appear before Parliament and makes us a feedback that they are just not able to appear within not the required time, it is disrespectful. Not only to these members, but to the president of this country, who supported and said that they should appear before this house. A disrespect to you, Mr. Speaker. equal to us as members. This is not something that we want to allow moving forward. The Minister for Health, Susan, has also not equally been appearing to the Health Committee in the Senate. Then who is she in this country if she cannot appear before Parliament? We need answers, because the next question, the first question that when she'll appear will be, why don't you appear before Parliament? We need to know if in that job description that she signed stated that it will be in her choice either to appear or not to appear. We need to understand the job description of these ministers. Is it in their clause? Then hence they behave the way they want to behave? We have matters we needed to ask. We have business we needed to conduct. We are here because of the representation that we do for this country. And if they are not going to be able to execute their mandate, they need to tell Kenyans, we are not in a position, because appearing in Parliament is one of their responsibilities. If that cannot be achieved, that we need answers to be able to give other Kenyans the opportunities to serve people in this country. You know the matters of health, how sensitive they are in this country. And the whole minister decides. It is wrong, Mr. Speaker. We cannot move forward like this. This is a day, a Wednesday day, we set for the Senate to abandon our committee sessions, to be able to sit with the ministers. We have a manifesto as Kenya Kwanza, to be able to achieve the plans that we set during our campaign period. We can only achieve when us, the representatives, sit with the executive, be able to question on the matters that need to be addressed. And then today somebody decides that they're not going to do that. Total disrespect. Total disrespect. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, we need better than this. It is what it is, and we need better results. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Margaret Kamar.
Mr. Speaker, mine will be brief, because I and you served in the position of cabinet before, and the respect we had for the House was above everything else. It's a pity that CSS are not appearing as they have promised, because it's one thing to give an apology, and it's another one to give an apology when the House is already sitting, because we are wasting our whole morning because of them. I think it's very important that they get the message today that we are not going to. But, Mr. Speaker, there is still also the appearance of ministers in committees, and we have had this problem in the Committee of Education. We even have had a problem which has come to this House, which was forwarded to the committee, to our committee, on payment of teachers of monies that were accrued between 1997 and the year 2000, I think, and 2. And the CS of Treasury was supposed to come. 3 times he has missed. We have fined him 500,000. He has not come. He has sent a message that he should be forgiven for the 500,000, but he has not arrived again. I think, Mr. Speaker, even as we conclude this discussion, you need to invoke that non-appearance fine, because it is good that we hold them also responsible on their own so that they feel the pinch, because Kenya is losing. Kenya is losing because if we don't address the issues that members have, issues that have come from, petitions that have come before us, it is really a waste of time. I remember yesterday, as we were going through, taking stock in our committee, we discovered that we have performed only 50%. We have only addressed 50% of the questions, and all the others, 50% of them, 10 questions have not been responded to, let alone appearance. They have said respond, so that if we find a need to invite you, we invite you. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with my leader of majority and all those who have contributed that it is very important that we make the statement clearly. But my suggestion is that we invoke the standing order that has a fine, so that we fine them and they actually start to take responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheptumo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to add my voice also to this very serious matter. Mr. Speaker, if you read Article 1 of our Constitution on the sovereignty of the people, Sub-Article 2 says, the people may exercise their sovereign power either directly or through their elected representatives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when a CS displays contempt to this House, that CS, Mr. Speaker, is actually directly challenging the sovereign power of the Kenyan people. And Mr. Speaker, it is the President himself who formally wrote to this House, Mr. Speaker, under your leadership, and requested us to amend our standing orders so that the ministers should appear before the House and answer questions. The intention of the President then, Mr. Speaker, and I think even up to now, is so that he is able to be accountable to the Kenyan people. That was the intention. Then, Mr. Speaker, the question that arises, therefore, is, if the head of state has been able to request the House to amend the standing orders, went ahead to do so, and the same CSS in the executive fails to appear before this House, Mr. Speaker, what then does that mean? Mr. Speaker, I agree with the leaders who have spoken earlier than me, that this is the moment this House should be able to take its position, Mr. Speaker, and be able to put strict measures to these failing ministers. Mr. Speaker, if you look at question number 18 in the standing order, in the order paper today, which was supposed to be answered by the Minister for Foreign Affairs, it is about Kenyans who are arrested in Uganda and charged in a court of law in Moroto district in Uganda for crossing over in search of pasture. Mr. Speaker, these are Kenyans who are already in custody in a foreign land. The CS was supposed to come and address Kenyans here, what steps he's taking. And it's not coming, Mr. Speaker. You can see the extent of the pain that is causing Kenyans by them failing, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to really agree with this, the leadership, that is the majority leader, that, Mr. Speaker, this should not be taken lightly. And, Mr. Speaker, you've been able to guide. In this particular House, Mr. Speaker, if a member is out of order, you always expel members out of this order, Mr. Speaker, out of this sitting. What is the redress, Mr. Speaker, for the Kenyan people who are suffering, who needs to be addressed on matters health, matters security, matters water, and the ministers in charge failed to appear? I think, Mr. Speaker, the sanction that should be put in place should be such serious. And, Mr. Speaker, I think this House has the power to discipline these ministers in a manner. And I want to agree with Kamar that perhaps, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, you may impose the payment of fine of $500,000 to these two ministers who have failed to appear before this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I support, and I think going forward, Mr. Speaker, again, as I conclude, it is even more worrying that not only are they failing to appear here, they even fail to appear before the committees. So, Mr. Speaker, in the chamber, they don't appear. In the committees, they don't appear. So, how will this House function, Mr. Speaker, in serving Kenyans? It is painful, and, Mr. Speaker, I think you have the powers to impose certain serious penalties to these ministers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Dulo.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to give an info. First, let me say that there was a reason why the President and members of Parliament felt that ministers should come and appear before this House to answer certain questions that are actually affecting Kenyans. And I think for them to fail to appear before this House is disrespectful to this particular House and to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, we have provision and powers and privilege where ministers are actually supposed to be summoned. Failure to which they can also be charged a certain fee. And I think for us, we should start actually doing that so that these ministers can respect this country. Some of us, we woke up very early to come and actually listen to them so that we can represent our people. And for them just to say that we have gone for trips, that is not important compared to the challenges Kenyans are facing. Mr. Speaker, we need to take serious action against those ministers who actually give an excuse every now and then. I thank you.
Senator Mariam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, giving me this opportunity as I add my voice. Mr. Speaker, as ministers, as finance, as vice chair of committee health, we have not, we call Minister of Health 4 times, she has not appeared. I think, Mr. Speaker, CS must differentiate between this is not a private office. This is a public office, and they have to differentiate what is their role. And first priority is the role of Kenyans, what to do for Kenyans. As a health sector, we have to strengthen devolution and health sector. Mr. Speaker, and again, Minister of Trade, we also called him and he has not appeared. So that shows they are not even serious on their work. Mr. Speaker, again, what I realize as a new person in this Senate, ministers, they don't take serious Senate issues because we are not the budget makers for them. So let them clearly that if first priority is National Assembly or Senate, because they have to treat them well together, the same as National Assembly and Senate are the same government armies, and they are supposed to treat them the same. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to summon, we summon them, but they have not responded. So that means that is disrespect. And when they are given these positions, they have took the oath that they will be ready to work with Kenyan and the MPs. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, this shows that there's a disrespect, and we have to summon them and give them fees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Seki.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also want to contribute to this contribution by the Majority Leader on this issue of cabinet ministers not appearing before Senate and even the committees. In our Committee of Trade, we have, Honorable Speaker, tried to invite the Minister for Trade, but he has never appeared to our committee. Equally, I'm also a member in the Committee of Education, and the Minister for Finance, Treasury, National Treasury, has always been absent on issues that involve citizens of this Republic of Kenya, teachers of this Republic of Kenya who are retired, and they have never received any pension for quite a number of years. And these are very pertinent issues, Honorable Speaker. We really need to have very punitive penalties to these cabinet ministers who are not appearing before this House and even committees, because I don't think we were wrong to change the standing orders, and the president himself instructed and gave an instruction that cabinet ministers must appear before this house. So I think we don't want to continue labor in, and even talking to them. We just need now to penalize them and let them feel the consequences. Otherwise, we are dissatisfied on what they are doing and the kind of notices they give us the last minute. We have processes. This house is a house of order, and a house that has its own process and plans. So I don't think they should come here to disrupt the entire process of the Senate. So I think we want to support you, Honorable Speaker, to give penalties to this, to penalize these cabinet secretaries who are not coming. And if then it is supposed for us to call the prime cabinet minister here, prime cabinet secretary here, to answer as to why his cabinet secretaries are not coming to appear before this house. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Senator Veronica.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Let me first say this morning that the Senate is very disappointed and expresses displeasure at the spite and the contempt that has been shown by the CSs who have not appeared here. But let me also be quick to point that there are a number of CSs who have shown respect and have met their constitutional obligation by appearing before this House. And one of the CSs we must distinguish is the CS for Interior, the Minister for Interior, who has been very respectful to this House and has appeared, I believe, twice before this House and presented responses to questions that were raised by senators on behalf of the people of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it appears as though the CSs are not taking this as an important function or a very vital function of accountability to the people of Kenya. And the reason why some of the questions are being raised by Kenyans is because maybe the ministries have not been fully effective in serving the people of Kenya. And for that, they must remain accountable and continue to improve the services that are being rendered from the ministries. And if those services are being rendered at an optimal level of 100%, nobody would call them here to ask questions that are being asked by senators on behalf of the people. I would also want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that for repeat offenders who do not appear, who are summoned to answer questions and they do not appear, Mr. Speaker, then we should consider also a motion to censure such a CS who does not want to come and explain the functions of the ministry or respond to issues that have not been adequately tackled to the extent that citizens are asking questions on their areas of operation, Mr. Speaker. By and large, Mr. Speaker, we would wish to remind the CSs, and unfortunately it's being done by senators, even from the side of the Kenya Kwanza, we would wish to remind them that this House, Mr. Speaker, amended the standing orders to accommodate an opportunity and to give a platform to the CSs to be able to have a conversation with Kenya through their representatives. And for that, Mr. Speaker, they must abide by the standing orders, they must abide by the summons when they are summoned to the House or summoned to the committees. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, the penal sanction should come into play. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Hillary Sige.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It took time before I could appreciate that the opportunity was to myself by the reference to my first name. I would like to also express my displeasure, Honorable Speaker, on the conduct of the cabinet secretaries. And I was going through the standing orders which were amended for a reason. Mr. Speaker, Standing Order 51D of the standing orders of this House provides that the Senate may, where a cabinet secretary fails without reasonable cause to appear and responds to questions under this part, move a motion to censure the cabinet secretary. Mr. Speaker, as at the time of this amendment, I believe this was done in order to ensure that the reason as to why cabinet secretaries are asked to appear before the House is to speak to Kenyans through their representatives on questions which are very key and which requires their personal attention and attendance before the House. One of the questions that was meant to be asked today, earlier on, Senator Jeptumo, question number 18, with regards to Kenyans who are currently arrested and in a foreign country, was one of the questions whenever he has traveled to. It is something that would have taken priority over any other engagement by the cabinet secretary. And it is a show, Mr. Speaker, of disrespect to the House. It is a show of desire to make sure that the cabinet secretary takes responsibility for the core mandate, because this House is a representative of all the Kenyans. The cabinet secretary sits in the office to make sure that the role that this House performs is within the demands that is required. And therefore, their failure to appear, and worst, giving the excuse that they did in the last minute, is a complete disrespect of the House. Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues in expressing the displeasure in calling the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Cabinet Secretary for Health for failing to honor the House, for failing to even give the House sufficient notice in terms of their inability to appear. And Mr. Speaker, in order to make sure that we do not waste the time of this Honorable House in future, we need to ensure that we call them out and we censor them where possible. And in particular, remember this House has passed the bill on powers and privileges, where such individuals can be surcharged at a personal level, where they meet the cost that the law provides for their failure to perform their role using their own resources and not public resources. The moment we do that and we implement that, Mr. Speaker, they will appreciate the need to comply. Secondly, and lastly, Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary that coordinates the offices of Cabinet Secretaries must also be summoned so that he also takes responsibility for his ministers who fail to attend to summons of this House and summons of the committee. Hearing that certain cabinet secretaries take their pleasure and time to attend even to summons by committees is completely out of order, and we call upon them to immediately correct where they have failed to do so, whether intentional or otherwise. But more importantly, this House needs to stamp its authority, surcharge them where possible, and also apply the provisions of Standing Order 51D and censor them, so that Kenyans can also appreciate that once a public or state officer is given responsibility, there are consequences of their non-compliance with the summons or with the responsibilities that their offices demands of them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddy. You may contribute while seated, Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and actually good morning. I have not been in the House for quite a while, and thank you for your support during this time. I know I'm still on sick leave, but sometimes it is sickly to be in the House and not to be in the House at home and not being here, because sometimes the deliberations here are more important and more healing than being at home. And I want to thank you so much for allowing me the flexibility to sometimes show up. Mr. Speaker, I think that this is a pertinent issue. And I think that from the minority side, it's very hard sometimes for me to chime in because, as you're aware, the minority side is still in court on this particular issue of cabinet secretaries appearing before the House. And I think that I wanted to just contribute in the spirit of being the Senate, and perhaps my ideological or perhaps our collective ideological leading that this house actually should be the upper house. And in some areas, we can be able to deliberate and have a conversation whether we can, rethink some of the decisions that you have made, Mr. Speaker, because this is one of the instances that perhaps the minority side had predicted, and perhaps we might even have worse instances where cabinet secretaries might want to disparage the standing orders of this house for the same purpose that perhaps constitutionally they are not obligated to obey the standing orders of this house. I know there is a desire, and I believe that I speak to the minority side when I say that there is a desire, and rightfully so, to have cabinet secretary appear before the Houses of Parliament. Because if you read the Constitution does delineate the responsibility and accountability framework for senators, for cabinet secretaries. But that delineation is limited to the extent that they have to appear in committees. So this is a challenge that as a country we are dealing with, but I wanted to encourage the Senate to have a higher conversation of how do we make this accountability framework even stronger. To some extent, we might be faced with things like proposing a constitutional amendment, because, Mr. Speaker, the decisions, responsibilities, and accountability for cabinet secretaries is very well articulated under Article 153, which you have talked about many times, but I want just to go back to it for the purposes of this conversation. If you read 153.1, it says that all their decisions must always be in writing. And then, if you come to 2, it says that cabinet secretaries are accountable individually and collectively to the president for the exercise of their powers and performance on their functions. So then it requires perhaps that in the event that the standing orders of this house have been adjusted for them to appear, and then they don't appear, then, Mr. Speaker, does it mean that through your chair, the Senate writes to the president to launch a complaint? And if this house writes to the president to launch a complaint, what then becomes the accountability framework for the executive vis-a-vis the parliament? Because the moment we start exchanging with the executive, and particularly the president, on the issue of cabinet secretaries not getting to this house, then already we are interfering with the Constitution. Then secondly, the Constitution says that a cabinet secretary shall attend. Remember, the issue of accountability is provided for in terms of, 1, providing documents in writing, and 2, where they're supposed to attend. And the Constitution says that in terms of attendance, the cabinet secretaries shall attend before a committee of the National Assembly or the Senate when required by the committee, and answer any question concerning a matter for which the cabinet secretary is responsible. With regards to provision of documents, if you read the same article, sub-article 4, that is where they can be able to provide us with documents in writing. So there's a lacuna here that we have created with the standing orders, Mr. Speaker, that I think that is dangerous for us and exposes us, because even if you were to impose something like a fine that some of my colleagues are proposing, on what basis does a cabinet secretary honor that kind of fine? Because if they go if you go to court, I can assure you the court will stick to the interpretation of what is the accountability lab and framework for cabinet secretaries as required in the Constitution. So I do appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that this is a dilemma that we are dealing with as a House, and you must be respected, we must be respected. But I think that whether informally or formally, I wanted to plead with you, Mr. Speaker, that this is something that we need to have a higher conversation than just the National Assembly, because we are the House that helps some sense of stability in terms of representation, given that as a Senate, we hold that majoritarian kind of representation, given that all the constituencies in our counties end up giving us that power to be able to help this house, this nation think at a higher level. I do appreciate that the majority side has decided that we adjust on our, standing orders to allow the cabinet secretaries in. But, Mr. Speaker, we are going to face a lot of these dilemmas going forward. This is just an introduction to the dilemma we'll have with the cabinet secretaries, because some of them individually, as the Constitution has said, will be sure that they are protected by the Constitution, not to be punished by this House for not appearing or in this House, but in committees. So I wanted to urge, if it suits this House, that let's allow ourselves, that these are bipartisan conversation, that we have at a higher level on how do we ensure that we can keep the cabinet more accountable to us, but within the framework of the Constitution, that even if it is a hard choice that we have to make as a country to amend the Constitution, then let us do it. Because otherwise, they're not members of this House, and they're not obligated to be in this House, and they know, and you cannot punish them or keep them accountable to that, unless you directly induce the same with the presidency, which again brings conflict of accountability and responsibility between the cabinet, between the presidency and Parliament in general, but more specifically with regards to Senate. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to add my voice into this issue that has not only been affecting the business of the committee. Indeed, a lot has been said about the legal implication and legal requirements. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would want to say, we, especially on the majority side, we have one obligation of representing and prosecuting government business. But if the CSs, who are the instrument through which the executive formulates and implements the policy, if they are not prepared to come and answer basic questions that would help us prosecute the same two of the people we represent, how then do we even work? I think, considering that, yes, there are a lot of legal implications, as Senator Eddie has said, I would want to disagree that it is actually a question of goodwill. Much of the work that we have to do in politics, it's about the goodwill that is and should be there between the members when it calls upon the minority and the majority leaders to sit and close ranks and discuss issues that will ensure that we advance and promote devolution. Mr. Speaker, sir, at times it's very discouraging, more so when we are in recess and we are scheduled to meet as CS in a committee. You travel all the way from up country only to be told that morning the CS is not appearing. That has happened severally, and there are some who are totally notorious. In the large committee, which I'm a member of, we have several issues, several statements. I do remember there is a statement by one senator here, Senator Wambua, that was given last year, November. It was about drought mitigation. Up to now, Mr. Speaker, we've not been able to address it. At times, it's quite shameful when you're addressing an issue that has been overtaken by events, and you do not even know what to tell people. We have statements we are supposed to look at, but without the input of the ministers, we are lost. I therefore think, Mr. Speaker, it is important as a House, and specifically because you have the power to engage, maybe even with the presidency, because the excuse that I've traveled with the president, I'm traveling with the deputy president, most of the time, Mr. Speaker, it's the excuse we are given. And at times, they're only traveling within the country. And I ask myself, the business that they are going to prosecute, where they are going for those meetings, those are the same matters that we want to discuss in the committee. It therefore hampers the business of the committees when we are not able to answer questions, we are not able to prosecute in the statements, we are not even able to explain to the petitioners or to the people who place the statements what is the official position. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, my request to the chair would be use your position so that it does not become very frustrating and very demotivating for us, especially in the committees that we share, that we are at times even seen by some members of our committee like we are shielding the executive. We are not, Mr. Speaker. We would try to give excuses. We will try to give explanations, but you cannot do it 5, 6, 7 times. It is, Mr. Speaker, sir, time that you clapped the whip, used the position you have, and even have a candid discussion with the executive. Because that point is going to come when we are going to say, fine, if it is the executive, the presidency, that is making them not appear, then we may as well sit back and let them prosecute the business, which you know will not be very good. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I think it is important that you start a candid discussion. As we do the things officially, as we do the lighting, we also tell the presidency this excuse that I'm traveling with the deputy or with the president outside, maybe in another county, it should come to an end. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Muma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this conversation. Mr. Speaker, I think what is happening is affirming the need for the Senate to fight for its independence so that the Senate is able to move as Senate, not because there is a trigger from the executive. Mr. Speaker, the Wednesday morning sessions were celebrated as a session that was going to bring a cure to the perennial non-appearance of CSS in the Senate. You can see, Mr. Speaker, that it doesn't seem to be any different. The CSS don't want to come to the committees, and they have started snapping this session. Mr. Speaker, it points to the fact that what we needed to do is to actually look at what our functions are independently and insist on implementing those our powers without necessarily saying we are setting a session because it is the desire of the president. Mr. Speaker, I wish to wear the shoe of CS Nahumicha for a second. So this session was on the trigger of the president that we should have, ministers should come here every Wednesday. But it is the same president who we are being told has gone with Mrs. Nahumicha to a foreign trip. So we are talking about a house that acted in order to meet the president's need, and also a CS who is trying to meet the president's need. I think it shows that we need, as a Senate and a parliament, to focus on our mandate and to implement it without feeling we are implementing it as a favor to the executive. Mr. Speaker, if we don't get back to that, we are losing this house. So I would request that in all matters, that the Senate does not defer to the executive. Otherwise, they feel we are a footnote in all their business, and therefore, our business can wait. And they can, on short notice, tell us that we can hold on because they have more important business to do as the executive. Mr. Speaker, it has been suggested that the CS be surcharged. And I agreed that the CS should be surcharged. Mr. Speaker, what we need to do is that I hope the taxpayer will not be paying the surcharge, because it is the taxpayer that is being shortchanged here. If any CS is surcharged on this matter, I wish to request that Senate ensures that the rule requires that the minister or the CS in charge pays from their own personal resources, so that the taxpayer is not surcharged for the failure of a public officer in taking on their responsibility. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I request that this matter is not just swept under the carpet. The two CSS should possibly be summoned before this House to discuss this very matter before they even come for the discussion of their questions. They need to be summoned before this Senate for a discussion with them on their behavior in regard to this matter. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wafula. Senator Wafula.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa Speaker. Asante sana kwa nafasi hii. Lile tunalozungumzia sasa linapata mawaziri katikati ya jiwe na mahali pagumu, pale ambapo aliyowateua na anayeamini kwa uchapakazi wao na uadilifu wao ameona kwa hekima yake kuwapa nafasi kusafiri naye katika nchi za ng'ambo kutetea nafasi na hadhi ya nchi ya Kenya na mustakabali wa wizara zao na nchi wanakokwenda. Na hapa sisi kama wawakilishi watumwa wa wapigaji kura vile vile tunadai uwepo wao na majibu yao. Ni kama shingo kuuliza kichwa, mbona hautumiki kumeza chakula unachotafuna? Mheshimiwa Spika, naomba kwamba jumba la Senate na wachapakazi wake wawe na udiplomasia wa mapema, kujadili ratiba na mipangilio kwa mapema, na vile vile mawaziri na wasaidizi wao wawe na mawasiliano ya karibu na jumba la Senate ili mipangilio yao isilete aibu mbele ya Wakenya. Kwa mfano, sisi ni serikali, wale tunaoshutumu ni wachapakazi wa serikali. Iwaje mkono mmoja unaukata mwingine kwa madai kwamba mkono huu haujathibiti majukumu tuliyotupa? Sasa mimi kama mmoja wao maseneta wa serikali, tutawarai viongozi wenzangu katika serikali tuwe na kikao na tusemezane haya maneno, kwa sababu haiwezi kuwa tunakuja hapa kulia na baadaye tena tutakaa na mawaziri kupanga agenda ya nchi. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Speaker.
Senator AC Okenyure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I also want to speak expressing my displeasure for what has just happened. I don't know if cabinet secretaries are just too afraid of defending their performance records in this house, or it's a matter of total disregard for democracy. Because I think this is the right avenue for a cabinet secretary to defend and show the public and articulate government policy, as members of the Senate also do the same through the legislative means, Mr. Speaker. But the continuous behavior we are seeing actually calls us as leaders to think about how we want to serve the Kenyans in this country. Mr. Speaker, even if you're going to penalize these cabinet secretaries, if within an individual has no drive to give service to Kenyans from both the executive and the legislative arm, it's not going to be having much impact. We need to have a serious conversation and not just government side. We are now leaders representing Kenyans from different walks of life who are expecting the executive to deliver on that end, and members of the Senate whom they voted for to deliver from their end. So this morning, I really want to urge our colleagues on the executive end to seriously think about the direction we want this country to be in. Before I came to this house as a senator, I really used to admire the constructive engagement the previous houses would have. Lately, it's more like a routine. The vigor, the quality debates, we have a problem, all those are going down, and I'm beginning to think, really, is this what we want to show the millions of Kenyans who have bestowed their mandate for us to lead them? Mr. Speaker, it's not about settling scores. And I want to urge the cabinet secretaries appearing here to explain government policy. This is the cheapest opportunity you have, because then we are the ambassadors who are going to take down the message to the various constituencies and wards. But when you turn this down, and I think, yes, explanations have been given, last minute explanations, and on my end, I would want to imagine, yes, if the president requests a specific cabinet secretary to accompany him, there might be matters that are relevant to the Kenyans, and he deems fit that the specific cabinet secretary accompanies him. But that should not be an excuse for members failing to attend this question time, because where else do you want citizens to get answers from? In committees, you don't appear. At the Senate, you don't appear. Where do you want your help to come from? And we do not want to go to the streets like our colleagues did. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also want to join my colleagues on at least the concerns that most of the ministers have invaded this House. Honorable Speaker, as you're aware, this is a presidential system of government, and it was only through the consultation of the executive and the parliament that the standing orders of this House have been changed for the convenience of the public of Kenya and for the convenience of the people of Kenya, so at least they can be able to hear how the executive and the parliament are related, and getting related and working for them. As you're aware, we have just changed, in the 11th and 12th parliament, the ministers are not coming, and the executive was not there. And I think it is actually the same executive that has felt that the ministers must appear in the houses so that at least Kenyans will be able to be informed on what is going on in its own development and whatever is taking place. But however, it's very unfortunate that the ministers are invading the houses, especially the Senate. But one thing they should know that is that this is the very house that's able to impeach even the president. It's not that they're taking it light. The house that actually have the honors to impeach the president and the governors. So I think ministers should understand. I know why they're going to National Assembly is just because that's where they get some of their money. I mean, when they're making their budgets. So they believe if they don't attend there, then maybe they will not be able to get the relevant, budgets that they want to use. But however, it is very unfortunate that ministers, the CS actually are now invading the houses, and that shall not be so. I think we need to consult both houses, to consult with the executive to show that I know the head of state actually is so much serious about the whole issue, because this is actually a suggestion that came from the executive. And therefore, this must be implemented. And I think the ministers now should be facing heavy penalties for invading the houses to answer the respective questions. That actually the questions we present are not our questions. The questions belongs to the public. And the very public that we represent, all of us. The very public that all of us are serving, including the ministers. Therefore, there is no reason for us, to the ministers to invade, coming to this house to answer to the public. With those few remarks, I want to ask my colleagues also, and I join them, that we must at least take action that is appropriate for these ministers to attend when they are summoned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Next order, clerk.
Order number 8, motion, incorporation of intelligent water management systems in building plans for sustainable living.
Senator Wamatinga, you may proceed to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to reply. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me start by thanking my colleagues who contributed a lot in this motion. They did unleash the idea, and they did also suggest way forward that we as a country can embrace the dangers that are facing Kenyans today in matters climate change. Mr. Speaker, sir, indeed everybody did agree that it is the high time we started treating water as prestigious commodity as it is. It is indeed in some places known that water is more expensive than fuel. We have all along, Mr. Speaker, sir, treated water like a commodity that is not diminishable. But the discussion through this motion, we came to the realization, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we need, as a country, to embrace methods not only to conserve water, but also to make sure that whatever we have, we use it intelligently. Mr. Speaker, sir, indeed, it must be a part of the government policy to ensure moving forward that we do not only conserve water, but we also employ technology as it is today so that we can ensure that water is used in the right way. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, sir, the country as it is today, having come from a long drought, now endowed with quite good rainfall, we know that in a couple of months we'll be faced with drought again, Mr. Speaker, not because the climate is not favorable, but because as a country we failed to ensure that we put measures in place to harvest, and not only harvest, but also make sure that whatever we harvest, we use it intelligently. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you've traveled across the globe, most of the facilities that we get, they have intelligent water systems whereby the water tap will go on and off as you use it. Mr. Speaker, sir, in a country like ours, where we're still struggling with resources, where we are faced with more than about 80% of the country being semi-arid, we need and we must embrace such a technologies so that the little water that we get can be used for a longer duration. As the government has put it, Mr. Speaker, sir, we'll be constructing mega dams, but they will also not be of any use, Mr. Speaker, if we do not embrace modern technologies to ensure that when we are doing irrigation, we move away from furrow irrigation, we move away from the open trench irrigation into the technology-controlled drip irrigation system. And this, Mr. Speaker, sir, can only be realized if we put the policy and legal infrastructure and measures in place so that we can enforce. And this, Mr. Speaker, sir, would mean for all the government buildings that we have, we must incorporate intelligent water systems for all the new buildings that are coming up, Mr. Speaker, sir. Before a license is issued, we must ensure that we also put intelligent water use system in place. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have TVET colleges across the country. The water pumping and intelligent water system is not a very complicated technology. Using the TVETs available, Mr. Speaker, sir, it would be an opportunity to introduce pipelines, to introduce the systems through the youth empowerment programs that they can be able to be incorporated in the buildings that will be coming up. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we embrace that as a country, if we embrace that, we will not only be able to save water, but at the same time we'll be able to conserve and the environment, and at the same time, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to note that every drop of water that gets into a household must be discharged somewhere. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that wastewater management in this country has become a major challenge. You only need to walk along the Nairobi River, along the Gong River, and several other rivers, Mr. Speaker, sir, that flows all the way to the ocean. See how intoxicated they are, Mr. Speaker, just because we have failed to manage the way we use our water. We failed to manage the way we manage our water waste system. Mr. Speaker, sir, today there are all off-shelf solutions that are available, affordable, and not as expensive that can be implemented to help the country manage the water systems, and as at the same time also ensure that we do embrace a lot of recycling so that we do not end up losing this as important resource. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we indeed embrace the intelligent water technology into our day-to-day usage, we would be able to save more than 60% of the water that goes to waste. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you look at the half a liter of a bottle, when you should buy from a supermarket, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you turn that into the liters that we lose, we are losing a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, that can be saved and that can be used to do other more pressing issues, and therefore, it must be a policy of the government. We as the people must also, as the leadership, must also preach to our people the importance of ensuring that we incorporate these intelligent water systems when we are doing construction. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I wind up, I would want to thank all the members who stood and contributed to this motion, and I would want to urge them not to stop there, but as they go in the balasas, as they go for the church services, as they go for the meetings with the radio presentation or TV shows, let them remind Kenyans that we have an obligation to ensure that we collectively conserve our environment so that it becomes sustainable for the future generation, because that is something that we are obliged to do to ensure that we meet all the development goals, while at the same time ensuring that they are sustainable, so that we do not lose the opportunity for the future generation to use this country, enjoy the fruits of this country as we did. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to reply.
Now, Honourable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order 84.1, I proceed to make a determination that indeed this matter does not affect counties, and therefore voting shall be by voice. I'll proceed to put the question. That aware that water is an essential yet scarce resource whose demand is increasing rapidly due to population growth, urbanization and industrialization, and whose wastage has become an issue that needs to be addressed urgently owing to the Kenyans' vulnerability to climate change, noting that there is a growth in the number of buildings coming up to accommodate the rapidly growing population, thereby posing a challenge to water management, appreciating that the incorporation of water management systems in building plans include a variety of techniques and technologies such as rainwater harvesting, wastewater recycling, low-flow plumbing, and sensor systems that detect leaks and deactivate water flow when necessary, thereby optimizing the use of water by eliminating water overexploitation, wastewater management, and pollution. Now, therefore, the Senate urges the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, in coordination with the Council of Governors and the National Environment Management Authority, to do the following. Incorporate it into the building code and standards a requirement for intelligent water management systems in all building plans, and 2, undertake a systematic nationwide renovation to government-owned buildings to incorporate water management systems. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order, clerk.
Order number 9, motion accelerating the implementation of sustainable development goals.
The Honourable Senator Catherine Muma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the motion on accelerating the implementation of sustainable development goals. Aware that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 provides a shared global blueprint aimed at ending poverty, protecting the Earth's environment and climate, and ensuring that people everywhere enjoy peace and prosperity, appreciating that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya started by the official launch of the Sustainable Development Goals in Kenya in 2016, followed by the development of the County SDGs roadmap to guide the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs, and the mainstreaming of SDGs at both the national and county governments, concerned that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya has been affected negatively by shocks such as continued drought since 2019 in Kenya and around the world, and serious invasion by desert locusts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health calamities, and the current strained state of the Kenyan economy. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with reviewed implementation roadmaps for the 2 levels of government, taking into account the shocks that have impeded or any other that are likely to impede the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, development. Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are one of the many international obligations that Kenya has signed onto. And Mr. Speaker, I move this motion so that as Senate and possibly the House of Parliament, we need to recognize the need to, in our job of carrying out oversight, we need to find a way of holding the executives, both at the national and the county level, accountable to delivering on the obligations that we make internationally as Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are a myriad of and aligned to a number of our own development agenda. And Mr. Speaker, this is something that we have recognized. In 2008, we had or developed our own blueprint, which is the Vision 2030, that has guided development planning in this country for all these years. Mr. Speaker, after the adoption of the SDGs in 2016, Kenya signed on to the SDGs and started aligning its medium-term plans alongside the Vision 2030. The Vision 2030 has three broad pillars: the economic pillar, the social pillar, and the political pillar. Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are 16 in number. They include SDG number 1, no poverty; 2, zero hunger. I'll just name them without any particular order. No poverty, zero hunger, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equity, clean water and sanitation, reduced inequalities, and peace, justice, and strong institutions. Mr. Speaker, all these are issues that we are trying to address as a country through our Vision 2030, through the current national government's own agenda, through the county government's planning. Mr. Speaker, what we don't do well in this country is to be able to have a forum where we are able to hold the executive accountable on how they are moving on the targets they have set on each of these SDGs. Mr. Speaker, this motion is seeking to require that the national government economic planning department and the county governments through the COG come up with a framework that can assist the Senate, can assist the National Assembly to be able to speak confidently, to be able to say, as Kenya, we have moved this far on this target number 1. We have moved this far on this target number 7. We are not doing very well on this other target, and the reasons we are not doing well are this. Mr. Speaker, anywhere any planning anywhere on earth, even in corporate planning, if you don't set marks, if you don't set targets, if you don't measure performance, then there is nothing you do. You are just moving around the circles. And Parliament, I'm afraid, has been moving around the circles. And I doubt that any of us can confidently be able to say that on SDG 7, Kenya is here and is not doing very well, or Kenya is doing very well, or the county of Meru is doing well, but the county of Kakamega is not doing well. We need to get to that level where we are able, as Parliament, to say that we are moving well on SDGs. Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the Constitution makes ratified international treaties and obligations as part of the laws of Kenya. We are the House that stands to make those laws and to monitor and oversight the implementation of those laws. So this motion is seeking to get national government and county government to move deliberately in a manner that will enable us to be able to see that the CIDP of Busia County has properly factored in and is able to give us information around the 16 or the 7 or the 8 SDGs on which it is able to report. Mr. Speaker, I move to support and I request that Senator Beatrice Oyomo seconds this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Beatrice.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to second the motion brought by Senator Catherine Moma over the Sustainable Development Goals. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the Sustainable Development Goals were ratification by the UN member states, as the mover says, in 2016. And Mr. Speaker, sir, they form a world, they form what other countries, the member countries, use to prepare their national development plans. And because of the constitutional composition of this country, where we have one national government and 47 county governments, Mr. Speaker, sir, it means the SDGs are cascaded down right from the development plans of this country to the 47 counties that we have in this republic. Mr. Speaker, sir, the SDGs were premised on delivery of 2030. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to note that we only have 7 years remaining to the end of 2030. Mr. Speaker, sir, as the mover indicates, the SDG she mentioned that there are 16, but Mr. Speaker, sir, there are 17 goals of the SDGs, and as she spells out, SDG 1 is no poverty, SDG 2 is zero hunger, SDG 3 is good health, 4 is quality education, 5 is gender equality, 6 is clean water and sanitation, 7 is affordable and clean energy, 8 is decent work and economic growth, 9 is industry, innovation and infrastructure, 10 talks about reduced inequalities, 11 is sustainable cities and communities, 12 is a responsible consumption and production, the 13th is on climate action, SDG 14 is on life below water, 15 is life on land, 16 is peace, justice, strong institutions, and lastly, the 17th SDG is on the partnership for all the goals. Honorable Speaker, the main rallying point of the Sustainable Development Goals is about leave no one behind. And Honorable Speaker, I'm happy also to mention that the last conference on the UN SDGs was in New York from the 9th to 19th of this month. Nobody was left behind in the participation from this country. We had a multi-sectorial team composed of the legislators, the county governments, and the representatives of the national government. That really was impressive at the conference, and all was to emphasize on what is the participation, what is the implementation program that each county has. Honorable Speaker, we as a Senate are so keen on the SDGs because a number of it talks to the mandates that the Senate has. The county governments draw their functions, some of them from the SDGs, and Honorable Speaker, the report that this country presented at the conference was impressive. But Honorable Speaker, we are still not as a country or as member states not performing up to expectation. It is upon this that I want to second the motion by Honorable Senator Catherine Moma that as a Senate, as Parliament, we need to get reports on the status of the implementation of the SDGs from the national government and from the county government, so that as a country we know what is our status in the years that we've had. And Honorable Speaker, ensure that the remaining 7 years we are able to upscale our performance and meet the goals of the SDGs as spelled out. Honorable Speaker, I second this motion.
Very well. Honorable Senators, I propose the question. Aware that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared global blueprint aimed at ending poverty, protecting the earth's environment and climate, and ensuring that people everywhere enjoy peace and prosperity. Appreciating that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya, started by the official launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs in Kenya in 2016, followed by the involvement of the country SDGs roadmap to guide the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs and the mainstreaming of the SDGs at the both national and the county governments. Concerned that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya has been affected negatively by shocks such as continued drought since 2019 in Kenya and around the world, serious invasion by desert locusts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health calamities, and the current strained state of the Kenyan economy. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with the reviewed implementation roadmaps for the two levels of government, taking into account the shocks that have impeded or any other that are likely to impede the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I can see a few senators are lined up for contributions. Senator Okech. Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is lovely to see you after a while. I want to...
Thank you. Also, Paul San, I can see you have something happened to you. I wish you quick recovery, Senator Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm getting better, and I'm happy to be able to once in a while pop in the house and contribute. And it's amazing that this morning we are discussing the SDG goals because these Sustainable Development Goals are a key framework to ensure that the human index in our countries can be able to improve, with the ultimate scale being able to have a happy nation. And that happiness is definitely signified by the element of dignity. Mr. Speaker, a few elements of development in the past have been development that are not keen to ensuring human dignity, to the extent that things like structural adjustment programs that we read about, and some of senators of this house actually did witness in the 90s and in the 80s, did not put a framework that can be able to ensure that development has got an inclusive growth in nature, and more awesomely able to look at the root causes of problems that nations, especially in the sub-Saharan African countries, and of course they also used to say Asian countries used to face. But in the context of Kenya, when SDGs were constituted together by the United Nations, Mr. Speaker, I think this was the first attempt that we saw a close focus to the real problems that we were facing. As the second of the motion, Senator Beatrice has actually highlighted, some of the SDGs that we're talking about, one being no poverty, second being zero hunger and good health, among others, together with education. These, in the context of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, have become goals that, for us, they have become issues of basic needs. If you remember, Mr. Speaker, there used to be a time that basic needs used to be classified as simply housing, food, and clothing. But for our country, we have moved deliberately so to be able to include things like health and education as fundamental to our conversation in this country. But of course, the motion today, Mr. Speaker, is to the extent of trying to assess what have we achieved with regards to the implementation of these sustainable development goals. I wanted to invite your attention, Mr. Speaker, to the idea that even though we wanted to advance the implementation of sustainable development goals, Mr. Speaker, we should not forget that we had Millennium Development Goals. And these Millennium Development Goals, Mr. Speaker, were not as much attained. And the worst thing is that when the time that was put in place for the Millennium Development Goals elapsed, there was no proper evaluation on the implementation and achievement that did. So the first thing I wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion is very, very good for us as a nation, notwithstanding other countries doing their own things, because, Mr. Speaker, we don't want to get to 2030 and then start being in a situation whereby we are saying that this was a time-bound ideology in terms of development goals, and therefore, because the timeline has elapsed, therefore we need to move forward to the next goals. That then we will be entering a country that is simply, engaging on rhetoric narratives that other people are engaging in. So, for us as a country, we need to look at what are the specific issues that constitute the challenges and opportunities that makes it either impossible to achieve some of these development goals or are just impediments that can be dealt with. And for me, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say very quickly that this will be for me when I cast my eyes upon Kenyan development agenda and economic planning. The first one, Mr. Speaker, that as this bill probably will go all the way and become an act that will be considered by the relevant ministry, the first thing I would want to see very well addressed by the relevant ministry is the issue of privatization framework on these goals with regards to our country. Mr. Speaker, most countries that I've seen try to achieve these goals have been very good at articulating the suitability and availability of resources with regards to these goals. As a country, we have not had articulation by the ministry of, that has got relevance instruments of economic planning, articulating our suitability in terms of our resources, both human and hard resources, with regard to some of these goals. Because these goals, when they come, many things end up changing. And because of that dynamism of a population of different innovations, we need to constantly review the suitability of human resource, the suitability of our resources, and more specifically, the suitability of even the ministerial framework put in place to be able to attain these goals. So that is something I would want to see, Mr. Speaker. And then number two, because we as a country, when these goals came in place, we hadn't been able to articulate the functionality of our devolved system, Mr. Speaker. It will be good for the relevant ministry to also look at, in the context of this bill, the fitting elements to local context of our devolved systems. Because, Mr. Speaker, as you know, Schedule 4 is not, cannot be ignored when you look at development goals, because Schedule 4 of the Constitution gives a lot of some of these functions to the devolved systems of this country, Mr. Speaker. And as we even look at this bill, Mr. Speaker, One thing that was also lacking that I wanted perhaps Senator Muma, as she will be working on this bill, to look at in the context of stress areas that we can be able to ensure that the ministry will look at, is the idea that both ministerial decisions as well as county government decisions must be reliant on the issue of data. Mr. Speaker, I remember when we treated with the NIS to talk about the issue of data sovereignty of this country, one of the biggest issues that came about was that we don't even have infrastructure as a country to own our own data. And this is a bill that gives us an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, if the mover can be able to think critically together with us as senators on how do we put a framework to ensure that our state statistical bodies can ensure that decisions with regard to SDGs are following data. As things stand right now, Mr. Speaker, as a country, we are still relying on international financial institutions and private research institutes to be able to rethink data with regards to SDGs. Mr. Speaker, this is something that needs to be looked at very critically. I also wanted to see in this bill, Mr. Speaker, an elaborate framework, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of stability. Because like many African countries, we are democracy. Sometimes after an election or before an election, Mr. Speaker, we tend to experience some kind of civil unrest or civil protests, or we are not in a place like a war situation that we have seen in other countries, Mr. Speaker, that has been very demeaning to SDGs. But that notwithstanding, we are a country that experiences before, during, and after elections a sense of instability. So I wanted to see a sense of framework that can be put into this bill, Mr. Speaker, to look at how does stability contribute to SDGs implementation. Because, Mr. Speaker, you can imagine something like industrial innovation and infrastructure development, as well as just building more progressive cities under the SDGs that requires sustainable development in urban areas. Nairobi, for instance, is a mega city and a prime city in the entire African continent. How do we envision in this kind of bill making a progressive development that instability does not affect the implementation of SDGs in this country? So, Mr. Speaker, I would want us to see how we can be able to include this in the bill. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to invite the mover of the motion, my good friend Senator Kathy Muma, to also think about the rapid population growth that we are experiencing. Because when these goals were put in place, some countries like Kenya in Africa do experience exponential population growths that do not necessarily go with the timelines that have been given by these SDGs. Our neighbors in Uganda, 50% of the country is actually almost 15 years of age. If you come to Kenya, the average age of a Kenyan today is about 19.5, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, we have got a country that is extremely young, that the population keeps on growing very fast, that sometimes the timeline that is given for these SDGs does not meet the pace of change with regards to development factors that are indicated in SDGs that we are seeing here. And of course, the SDGs, if it's anything to go by, is about improving the human development index, the dignity of the people. It's about the people, and to some extent about animals and the planet at large. But the core functionality is the people. So if there's no framework that can be able to assess, address, and therefore keep up with the population growth metrics of our own country, and I hope that even this can go to looking at it even at county levels, because different counties have got different population growth metrics. This will be very important element to see articulated in this bill to the extent that it can be able to guide the relevant ministry that will be dealing with these SDGs in the context of making sure that the implementation of SDGs is achieved in Kenya, and not only achieved, but excellently attained to the extent that we can be proud that we contextualize SDGs in the context of Kenyan development plan, and be able to say that even if there will be some development goals that will be put together by different nations, our own achievement will be superb according to our own targets as a nation. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you for this opportunity as I support this particular bill awesomely. Thank you so much.
Very well. Next is Senator Professor Margaret Kamar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to support this motion on accelerating the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals as articulated by Senator Catherine Moma. I want to thank and congratulate her for a well-articulated motion. Mr. Speaker, when Senator Moma was explaining that, she mentioned 2 points that I think need to continue to be emphasized, and this is about the implementation roadmap and measuring implementation. The biggest problem that we have in a lot of laws that we have ratified as a country is the fact that we ratify them and we keep them safely in drawers, and implementation becomes a problem. Mr. Speaker, the SDGs were as a result of the failure of the MDGs. The Millennium Development Goals were articulated.
Sorry, Senator Professor Margaret. Can you kindly give me like 3 minutes to execute something? Then we proceed. Thank you. Honorable Senators, the Speaker yesterday, who was presiding, made a communication that was affecting 3 senators. This was as a result of the issues that they were to substantiate, utterances that they made in the House in the course of the debate last week, Tuesday, 18th July 2023. The 3 senators were Senator Chalgei, Senator Mbedi Siengo, and Senator Daniel Maanzo. So during yesterday's afternoon session, Senator Daniel Maanzo was not present in the House. He was absent, not intending to be present. Therefore, that he is here, and if he feels that he is carrying a heavy load on his back, I want to give him an opportunity pursuant to standing on 105.2. I want to invite him to forthwith substantiate the claims. Actually, let me read him the claim that he has. Senator Daniel Maanzo, Senator Samson Chalagei, MP, saw the intervention of the chair to require Senator Daniel Maanzo, MP, to substantiate the statement that, I quote, "What is happening in Sondu is politically instigated." I close the quote. So, Senator Maanzo, I invite you to forthwith substantiate your claims, failure to which the senator shall be deemed to be disorderly within the meaning of standing under 121. In the absence of such substantiation, the senator will be required to withdraw the statement and apologize to the Senate. I thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Maanzo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, apologies for not being in the House yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I was pursuing an anticipatory bail on my behalf and on behalf of others in the High Court, and I was successful in the evening. So now I have orders of the court that I can move freely and come and participate in the Senate. Mr. Speaker, the statements I made that particular day on a motion, immediately after, I met the 2 senators of the areas and got information from Senator Cheriot that the trouble in Sondu was a stolen motorbike, which has really been sorted out by the 2 senators, and they have taken care of people who had been injured, and they have controlled the political situation in that area, the 2 senators. And I really want to congratulate them for that real show of leadership by senators of this House. And having been so informed by very well experienced senators and who personally were on ground, I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to withdraw and apologize for the same. Much obliged, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Manzo. What is out of order? Are you challenging his withdrawal?
No.
So what is it that you...
Mr. Speaker.
You know, you have just come in and you are trying to get some more time to the back door. And Professor is really waiting to execute...
No, really, I didn't want to interrupt the professor. But Mr. Speaker, I have been in this house for all this period of time. You know that me and you were in the National Assembly in the last session. And I'm increasingly becoming concerned on the issue of Standing Order number 105. Misuse of that standing order by members. I would request, Mr. Speaker, that we need really to relook at it so that we should not penalize opinions that are made in this House, which is enshrined in the Constitution, free speech in the chamber. Because we have seen all the time you see members rising up and saying, I'm rising on point of order number 105 on statement of fact, even where a member expresses mere opinion. So I think if we continue the way we are continuing, Mr. Speaker, we are going to curtail freedom of speech in this chamber. So my concern is that we really need to, as members, we really need to...
Just have your seat. Let me give you some information on what is really substantiating. You see, especially what Senator Manzo said that day, insinuated that what was happening in Sondu was politically instigated. You know, if there was a crash or some misunderstanding between one group and the other, and then that matter is told that it is politically instigated, you see tension develops, and that is where problems start. Senator Manzo is very happy to, he went ahead to find out what happened. And he is happy congratulating the two leaders who sat down and ironed out the matter. So I think on your proposal, I have no problem you coming up with a proposal to the relevant committee, yeah, on procedures and house rules committee, so that they can look at what your proposal. So you have that latitude, go ahead and come up with a proposal, submit to the relevant committee, so that when we change the standing orders, your proposal can be also considered. So therefore, give me time now, we continue with this important motion. Senator Margaret Kamar.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Speaker, for cutting it short, because I was worried that they are going to take longer. They should have been in the House at the beginning, so that they are given a chance to do their apologies to one another. But Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for this. I said, as Senator Muma was doing the presentation, she did emphasize the issue of having a measure of implementation, because most of the ratified laws or agreements that are international in nature sometimes get lost. And I'm very happy that she has picked this and has even pointed out the ministry, relevant ministry, that should work with the Council of Governors. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important motion for the Senate. It is very important for the Senate because of the fact that most of the items picked, as was articulated by a colleague who spoke before me, are really within the tenet of the Senate as far as Schedule 4 is concerned. And I want to touch, Mr. Speaker, I also need protection from colleagues who want to interfere with you.
Yeah, the honorable senators, can you get your seat? No, you are interrupting my business also.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The areas that are touched by the SDGs, which are really a product of the MDGs that failed, because most of Africa, most of Sub-Saharan Africa did not meet the Millennium Development Goals, hence the transition to the SDGs are still keeping us on toes. It is so important that as a government, we look at how we can implement. It is very important for the Senate because of this coming in of an oversight fund also, because we need to ask ourselves, if we are going to use oversight fund, what exactly are we going to do? What do we want to oversight on? And this could really form a major part of the agenda, because we can look at the various sectors and get our committees to go to serious business, to go to the ground and check how we can move our people out of poverty. Poverty is something that has hung around us for too long, far too long, Mr. Speaker. We should not be having anybody below the poverty line in this country, because this is something that should have been solved in the 50 years of our independence, but we are still faced with that. We now have an opportunity. As a country that has devolved funds, we have the Constituency Development Fund, and we have a fund that was supposed to actually bridge the gap in this country called Equalization Fund. When you look at SDG 10, which talks about reduced inequalities, both within countries and between countries, in Kenya we have disparities within the countries. And that was recognized during the development of the Constitution 2010. And at that time, there was this creation of an Equalization Fund, which was supposed to, within the first 10 years, bring everybody to almost the same level. We are now in the 11 to 15 years, and we must start asking ourselves, what impact has this money done? I know the Equalization Fund was delayed because of debates that were not moving as far. Now that it is there, we need to ask ourselves, what can it do? Because the fund was meant to bring everybody to an equal footing as far as the education sector is concerned, classrooms to be built. But, Mr. Speaker, sometimes you still wonder. You have children in this country studying under trees with CDF in millions, with counties having money in millions. Why should we have our children studying under trees? Mr. Speaker, we still have the water issue. Water and sanitation is SDG number 6. Why should we be reminded every day that our children are drinking dirty water? We need to seriously look at that and tell ourselves, water is devolved except for policy. What are our governors doing? Can we make sure that governors give us a roadmap on how they are going to implement that? It is very unfortunate, because during campaigns we tell women that as soon as you employ me, I'm going to focus on the area of water, so that every homestead has water. How far have we done? We've pushed it into the devolved government. Water is devolved, but how many homesteads have water as we are talking? Mr. Speaker, zero hunger. This one saddens me a lot, because I did agriculture. I was an extension officer in agriculture for many years before I joined the university to lecture in the same field of agriculture for many years. But then you look back and you tell yourself, where does the poverty really come in this country? Why are we still hungry as a country? There was a time, Mr. Speaker, when every district, those days of the districts, had a store called the National Cereals and Produce Board store. And food was distributed immediately after harvesting, when the prices were not only low, but because farmers also did not have to lose under post-harvest. And so food was being ferried to various corners of the country. I remember as a consultant for UNEP in Marsabit, I came across wonderful stores that accommodated not only maize, there was rice from where, there was maize from Trans Nzoia, and you could tell that this maize has been transported for the sake of the people in the region. At that time, the focus on poverty eradication was very high. It looks like we have gone back, and we are not ensuring that food reaches the needy corners of this country, because we have the producing counties, and we have counties that do not have the ability to produce much. more worse now with climate change. So distribution of food should actually eliminate this thing called poverty in this country. And we should eliminate hunger in particular. We have people who live in slums. What program do our counties have? What do our governors have? Because they have the money that we have voted so that they take care of this country. Hunger is, food is a right in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, to the extent that a child has right to food, good food, not only food, but nutritious food. How are we taking care of that? Children who are in school in nomadic areas are also suffering. And this is where we are having a lot of hunger. We are having hunger because nobody is paying attention to them. Do we even have data? Earlier in the morning, we discussed about CSS not coming. One of the key areas that we had wanted, and a question that has come to this house twice, is on how children are taken care of. How children with disabilities are taken care of. Who is feeding them? How much is being paid for them? Because we know we have the money is in the budget, but has it reached? So, Mr. Speaker, this motion is a very, very important motion, and I really support it. We must have a way of measuring. And I think it has really landed in the right place, that Senate should now have also its own program that would enable senators to go out and measure progress as far as implementation is concerned. Because most of these are really issues that have been devolved. We must start thinking about how we can reduce this hunger, eliminate hunger completely. SDGs are talking about elimination of hunger. If we don't start measuring where we are now and where we should be in the next year, we will not be able to progress. So that's why I really support this motion that is seeking a way in which we have a very structured manner of implementing this, and in particular, that we come up with a roadmap that can be measured so that each Senate can measure. So I think this is for us, and I thank Senator Muma for giving us this. This is an opportunity for senators to be able to implement what we should have been implementing, more so when we come to dealing with the oversight fund. Let's use our oversight fund very, very carefully, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that everybody in the country benefits from the senators as far as implementation of Schedule 4 is concerned. And I really look forward to Senator working, in fact, with the implementing agents to come up with that roadmap. Sometimes we give people an assignment, they take 1 year to develop something that you can develop in a shorter time. So we hope for the purposes of implementing this motion, she's able to work with the ministry, the relevant ministry, and the Council of Governors, which is really within our own docket as a Senate, to make sure that we implement and we ensure that our people benefit from no poverty, zero hunger, proper health, ensuring healthy lives in this country, quality education, and all those others, including one which I really treasure, the number 10, which is reduced inequalities in this country. Mr. Speaker, if we don't reduce inequality, we will still be in the streets fighting ourselves. We must reduce that. It is what is the trigger. But we thank the government this time because they have said they want to do bottom-up. So if it is bottom-up, these are the issues to implement. These are the issues to address. And if we address them, Mr. Speaker, as government addresses this, we should be able to get rid of this poverty within the shortest time possible. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Thank you. Well spoken, Professor. Senator Chalgay Samson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. From the onset, I want to congratulate and thank Senator Catherine Muma, one of the members of Speaker's panel. I think she's doing very well. I think this is a very unique area of topic on SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Speaker, it behooves all of us that we left Millennium Development Goals that was supposed to be achieved in a certain period of time. Mr. Speaker, this is a wonderful motion. I think Mr. Speaker, many people would assume that Senate is trying to look for the job that they want to do. But the courts have decided, Mr. Speaker, you remember the Supreme Court decision that Senate no longer, and I want, because I was following submissions earlier on, because I was held up in exigencies of duties somewhere, Mr. Speaker, the courts have ruled, even Supreme Court, and my citation is escaping my mind, that Senate does not only oversight equitable shareable revenue, a Senate also oversight own source revenue. Mr. Speaker, I want to say this because I'm aware there are some cabinet secretaries who fail to honor the question time. That they think that going to National Assembly is better than going to Senate because they have powers of budgeting. I think they are behind news because Supreme Court has ruled again, Mr. Speaker, that both houses, under Article 93 of the Parliament, that Senate and National Assembly participate in budget-making process, Mr. Speaker, sir. And therefore, I want to say that when we have question time, it is the order of the House. It is the amendment of standing orders came from the executive, and we know the president means very well. So, Speaker, those cabinet secretaries who continuously skive or fail to appear before Senate to answer public questions. This is not Senator Katuri's, Murungi's questions, or Senator Nyutu, or Senator Kamara, or Senator Catherine Muma. Questions, these are questions that we are asking on behalf of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, those cabinet ministers, we are marking them, and when time comes, appropriate action shall be taken against them, because, Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a country where people fail to account for the decisions they make in office. And they don't make it free of charge. We pay them to do. And therefore, I wanted to put that into perspective so that many people do not imagine Senate is looking for the work they want to do. Our role is anchored in the Constitution, including the role of coming up with SDGs. Mr. Speaker, in the upshot, the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, were for the developing countries, Mr. Speaker. But when it came to sustainable development goals, it moved now to all countries, regardless of whether they are rich or poor, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the SDGs is important because we will have the superpower countries, including the first world countries, developing countries, the underdeveloping countries, the third world countries, sitting on the table and discussing about the future of the planet. Mr. Speaker, there are 4 dimensions that SDGs wants to achieve. 1 is people, 2 is prosperity, 3 is planet, which is the earth, 4 is partnership, and 5 is peace. When you encapsulate the 17 sustainable development goals, it boils to 5 dimensions, where we look at the people. For example, as Senator Kamara said, the issue of poverty, one of the agendas, there should be no poverty, Mr. Speaker, sir, across the country or across the globe. Number 2, we should have zero hunger. It is sad that in this day and time, some Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, and we come from a drought that was very serious, some Kenyans are still dying because of hunger, or even across the world, or even in Africa, Mr. Speaker. And then we have what you call good health, Mr. Speaker. Good health is, I'm happy the government, through the plan of His Excellency the President and the government, they want to roll out universal health coverage to ensure every Kenyan has an access, Mr. Speaker, to medical health. And this is anchored also in the SDGs, Mr. Speaker. We want also to ensure, and you have heard the government, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of NHIF, by ensuring that people who at least do not earn, we pay NHIF based on the earnings and rationalization, Mr. Speaker. So that that person, an ordinary Kenya, a mama mboga or a boda will pay less for NHIF card. But you and me, who are salaried, should pay more to cover the others, Mr. Speaker. And the issue of health and well-being is very important. I hope it includes also the issue of reproductive health, the issue of nutrition, especially for the children, Mr. Speaker, who are still facing a lot of challenges when it comes to access to health. And I think Article 43, Mr. Speaker, has put it very well, that access to health is one of the critical issues. And I want to thank the President, through the manifesto of the plan, one of the factors that have been given attention, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue of access to universal health coverage across counties. Mr. Speaker, while we agree that health has been devolved, there is still a big role that counties play. Because on the issue, Mr. Speaker, and you served in the law house before, the role of the national government has been to develop the health policy. That is why when we want now national government to partner with counties in terms of providing medical health care, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I think it is very important that counties must take their rightful position. I come from a county where the issues of health have become a challenge, Mr. Speaker, where health has gone to the knees, Mr. Speaker, where when you go to Kapsabet County Referral Hospital, Mr. Speaker, there are no drugs. The services are very poor, Mr. Speaker. That is why the biggest question that many Kenyans continue to ask, should we roll back, should we bring back health to be a national government function? The question that many Kenyans ask, because if they are not providing sufficient services of health, for example, in Busia County, or Kakamega County, or in Nandi, Mr. Speaker, what should be the role of national government, yet the health function has been devolved, Mr. Speaker? And therefore, we come, and Mr. Speaker, we need to be honest. Counties, I've seen counties where, when they are allocating health function through their budget, they put a certain amount of money, then they think health is not very important, they go and pull back the resources from that account, Mr. Speaker, and then come and take it to the other functions like roads, like emergency services, what we call disaster management, Mr. Speaker. We must be honest with ourselves, Mr. Speaker, and therefore it continues to be a challenge on the matter of health, Mr. Speaker, especially in our counties. Counties must take their rightful position in providing health. But where I come from, Nandi County, we are still performing very poorly in terms of service provision, Mr. Speaker. There are no drugs. I'm happy the Public Service Commissioner renewed contracts of universal health coverage, Mr. Speaker. The facilities that are there, Mr. Speaker, the infrastructure, for example, like Kobuja, Mr. Speaker, the expansion of Kobuja Health Center is still a problem, Mr. Speaker, yet there were money that was allocated, Mr. Speaker. When you got pediatric in Kapsabet County Referral Hospital, it is wobbling. When you go to expansion of Maraba, Mr. Speaker, when they were expanding maternity wing, it's wobbling. I went to Chepterwa in Nyayo Ward, Mr. Speaker, and it has told, Mr. Speaker, and yet the national government gave money before in the last many financial years. And can you believe Nandi has been able to receive over 40 billion since I became the senator of this Republic of Kenya, Nandi, Mr. Speaker. So on the issue of health, if you have to use Nandi as a standard of provision of health, because I don't know other counties, then counties and Nandi specifically continues to perform poorly in terms of health provision and service to the great people of Nandi. Mr. Speaker, there's a statement I asked about the health committee on the status of health in Nandi. They are yet to respond. But Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue dispensing funds to the people, to the counties, and then when you go there, you are being told by Mwananchi, Mheshimiwa, I went to an hospital, but I was not given drugs, Mr. Speaker. When you go, for example, to Kapsabet town, there are many chemists, and people are saying, you know, Kapsabet is doing very well because there are many chemists. There are many chemists because Kapsabet County Referral Hospital, there is no drugs in county. People say there are so many private clinics in Kapsabet town, for example. It is because there is no medical services or tele-services in Kapsabet County Referral Hospital, Mr. Speaker. So in fact, we are failing in implementation of SDGs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another point that I wanted to make is under Article 43 on the issue to access to clean water. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's sad where I come from, we still struggle, for example, access to water. And you know Nandi is rainy throughout the year. But can you believe we still have challenges of waterborne diseases, Mr. Speaker, because we can't access clean water. And I'm happy national government has constructed and upgraded to 14 billion, Mr. Speaker, Keben Dam, that will provide water to Kapsabet city, Kapsabet town. It will provide water to environments around Lesos, among other areas, Keben areas, Mr. Speaker, and even Nandil's town, Mr. Speaker. There is still a challenge, Mr. Speaker, on water and sanitation. I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the national government because they have allocated with Longorian Water Project and Nandil's Water and Sanitation Program that will be constructed from Kosoiwa around 1.2 billion in water and sanitation within Nandil's town, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we are still looking at maybe Keses Dam, Mr. Speaker. We need to still expand even at the tune of 1.2 billion so that water through gravity all the way to Lesos, to Chepterit, and all the way to around Baraton, they can access, Mr. Speaker. That is the only way counties can realize the implementation of 17 SDG goals. And I'm using Nandi as an example because I'm well versed from where I come, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another factor that I wanted to, apart from clean water and sanitation, even in this city, Mr. Speaker, we still have, and Senator Muranga is seated behind me, Senator Nyutu, the issue of access to water provision to Nairobi City County, Mr. Speaker, is, I remember there was a tussle with the former county government on ensuring that we get water to Nairobi. Because, Mr. Speaker, the water in Nairobi, to get water in Nairobi is like getting medicine. You are not sure. Many Kenyans in this city, Mr. Speaker, approximately 4 to 6 million, cannot even access water. Because I am told, apparently, the million of liters that come to Nairobi City is not sufficient. So getting water, you can get drugs and get other things in Nairobi City, Mr. Speaker, than even accessing water. And therefore, it still continue to be, even sanitation in this city. When you go to slums, Mukuru, Kwanjenga, Kibra, among other Madara, and many other slums within the region, Mr. Speaker, they still have a big challenge of sanitation. And I think, Mr. Speaker, in line with what the President has on the issue of plan, Mr. Speaker, we talk about affordable housing. And when we have this affordable housing by the President, Mr. Speaker, it will allow the management of access. Because you go to Kilimani, a house that was the water sanitation, the sewerage system that was, and Senator Wamatinga had that motion before. You go to Kilimani here, the Chinese come and construct a building of 1,000 people. That, the water system, the sewerage system that was there was only meant for 10 people. How do these 1,000 people operate on the sewerage system that is there, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, finally, because I can see my light is on the good health, because these are 17 SDG goals. The issue of quality education, I want to agree, Mr. Speaker, as Nelson Mandela said, education becomes one of the critical equality tools that can be used. And the issue of industry, I'm happy the government yesterday, President William Ruto launched the electric motorbikes, and I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, it's one of the 17 SDG goals. The President also has talked about innovation and infrastructure. We have Juakali sector. Mr. Speaker, we should continue supporting Juakali sector, Mr. Speaker, and many others. Mr. Speaker, in the interest of time and my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, when you look under Article 132 on functions of the President, Part 1C, it says the President shall provide progress report. So what Senator Catherine Muma is doing is what we expect in future, the President, when he's bringing these reports under Article 10, because when you look at SDGs, it is anchored in Article 10. I don't know whether Senator Catherine Muma has looked at Article 10 on principles of national governance and good values, that the President should be able to provide this progress report to the House. And we can, when the President is doing annual State of the Nation address, he can provide about, because under Article 2.6, international obligations, where Kenya is a signatory, we become part of the entire process. And therefore, looking at the upshot and interpretation of Article 132 on the function of the President, it says, report in progress to the nation, all the measures taken and the progress achieved in realization of national values referred to Article number 10. And therefore, what Senator Muma is doing is within the Constitution. And I hope in future, as the President submits the progress report on the, for example, on human rights, this is some of the issues under SDGs are captured in both white, blue rights and red rights under the conventions that Kenya has signed under United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. And Kenya is a signatory, Mr. Speaker, to many instruments that are there, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to say, I would want to really to see the outcome and the prayers that will be achieved and the resolution of the House, Mr. Speaker, so that we can have counties bring an active role. So that counties, I can see counties, Mr. Speaker, so that of course, decent work and economic growth, Mr. Speaker, just to run through innovation, reducing inequality, sustainable cities and communities. I think those are 17 that have been, the Kenyans should know, Mr. Speaker, that SDGs is meant for all developing countries, but SDGs was all countries, but MDGs were meant for developing countries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this motion.
Thank you, Senator Chelagei. Senator Chelagei, the resolution sought from this, the Senate, is that the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, listen, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with reviewed implementation roadmaps for the two levels of government. Senator Danson Mungatana.
Bwana Spika, nataka kuchukua nafasi hii kukupa asante kwa kunipa nafasi na mimi niongee kuhusu mswada huu. Kwanza ningeanza kwa kusema asante sana, kumpa kongole Mheshimiwa Catherine Muma kwa kuleta mswada huu hapa bungeni Senate. Mheshimiwa Speaker, mswada huu ni mswada wa maana sana. Kama wenzangu walivyosema hapo mbele, ni kwamba tunaongea kuhusu masuala ya maendeleo katika dunia nzima. Mataifa ya dunia walikubaliana kwamba kuna vipengele 17 ambavyo mataifa yote ya duniani ingefaa wahakikishe vinafanyika katika nchi zao, ili dunia nzima tuanze kupata maendeleo. Bwana Spika, Kenya ilijiandikisha kama moja hayo mataifa ambao wanapenda ama wanadhaminia kufanya maendeleo na kupata zile vipengele 17 vifanyike katika nchi yetu. Mswada huu Bwana Spika unataka kuleta ama unalenga kuleta vipengele ambavyo vitahakikisha kwamba kuna ripoti ambayo inatokea kutoka kwa serikali kuu na ripoti ambayo inatokea kutoka kwa serikali gatuzi, kwamba serikali gatuzi zinafuatizia mipangilio ya kuleta hivi vipengele 17 vinafanyiwa kazi namna gani katika gatuzi zao, na serikali kuu inafanyia bidii gani kuhakikisha vipengele 17 hivi vinafanyiwa kazi, ama barabara gani ambayo inatumika ili vipengele hivi 17 viweze kupatikana na wananchi wa Kenya na dunia nzima waweze kuendelea mbele. Bwana Spika, mimi ninaunga mkono mswada huu kwa sababu mswada huu ukiangalia vipengele hivi, kwanza tunasema kwamba kipengele cha kwanza kinasema duniani kusiwe na njaa, no poverty. Ukiangalia sahi gatuzi zote za Kenya including na ukiongeza gatuzi yetu ya Tana River County, utaona kwamba hakuna namna ama mechanism ambayo imewekwa katika sheria ambayo inamsukuma gavana wa county kutoa habari kuhusu hali ya njaa katika gatuzi letu la county ya Tana River. Bwana Speaker, kwa sasa hakuna mechanism ambayo inamshurutisha rais atoe habari kuhusu kipengele cha kwanza ya hizi vipengele 17 vya ambavyo vilikubalika katika dunia nzima, aelezee kuhusu mambo ya njaa katika Kenya. Bwana Speaker, tukirudi katika hizi gatuzi, hichi kipengele, kwa sasa sote tunafurahi, hasa sisi ambao tunatoka gatuzi la Tana River na wengine ambao wanatoka sehemu hizi ambazo tumepata mvua. Tunashukuru Mungu kwamba mvua imekuja, lakini tunajua pia ya kwamba baada ya mvua kutakuwa kiangazi. Sasa mipangilio ya kuhakikisha ya kwamba wananchi hawatopata shida, mifugo haitapata shida, tukifuatizia hiyo kipengele cha kwanza, hatujaiona gavana akiongelea kuhusu hayo. Na ndio maana mswada huu tukiupitisha utashurutisha sio gavana tu wa Tana River, lakini magavana yote wao wanapanga mipangilio ili wananchi wasife njaa. Kipengele cha pili kinaongelea kuhusu kuondoa umaskini. Umaskini, Bwana Spika, ni kitu ambacho ni cha kibinafsi, shida ambayo ni ya kibinafsi. Watu wengi wetu wanakosa pesa, wanakosa namna ya kuishi. Lakini viongozi ambao tumewapa nafasi za kuendelesha magatuzi huwasikii wakiongelea ama kuzungumzia kuhusu umaskini katika gatuzi zao. Gatuzi kubwa kama Nairobi, husikii magavana hawa wakiongea kuhusu shida ya ukosefu ama uchochole katika kaunti ya Nairobi. Ndio kuna watu ambao wako sawa, lakini kuna wengi ambao wanaumia. Husikii miswada kama hiyo ikiongelewa na magavana. Kaunti zetu zote husikii. Ndio maana tunataka kusema huu mswada ambao Seneta Muma ameuleta inatufaa sana, kwa sababu italeta some form, kitu ya kupima. Italeta namna ya kupima kwamba kila mwaka ama kila wakati ambapo magavana wanapata nafasi, unakuja kuongelea kuhusu mambo ya uchumi, mambo ya kukosa chakula, mambo ya education, na sio education tu, lakini katika hii kipengele wanasema quality education. Mheshimiwa Bwana Spika, gatuzi letu la Tana River utakuta kuna sehemu ambazo shule ziko sawa, lakini ukiingia huko ndani utakuta sehemu ambazo bado mashule watu hawana madawati ya kutosha. Unakuta wanafunzi hawana classrooms za kutosha. Unakuta wanafunzi bado wanakaa chini ya miti, na ni gatuzi hilo hilo, Bwana Spika. Sasa tukiongea kuhusu mambo ya quality education, wengine wanapata education, wengine wanakosa kupata hiyo quality kwa sababu ya hali ambayo wanapanga mambo yao. Bwana Spika, ikiwa tutapata hii mswada upite vile tunaomba upite na vile tunaomba Senate ipitishe, tunajua ya kwamba gatuzi zote zitawajibika sasa waweze kutoa hali ya kusawazisha katika sehemu zote za elimu hapa Kenya. Bwana Spika, kuna issue ambayo inaongelewa hapa, moja ya vile vipengele vya kuonyesha kuwa tunaendelea ni kuwa na maji safi. Sahihi Bwana Spika, mwenzangu ameongea kuhusu gatuzi la Nairobi, lakini gatuzi la Tana River sehemu nyingi sana watu wanalia hakuna maji. Hakuna maji, hakuna maji safi. Tena sisi tuna mto Tana ambao hauishi maji. Ni mto ambao siku zote kutoka Januari mpaka Disemba huo mto uko na maji. Lakini kutoa maji pale, gavana wa Tana River na Tawasco, hiyo Tana River Water Company, hawajapanga namna ya kuhakikisha kwamba watu wanapata maji ya kutosha, ambayo ni namna ya kuleta umaskini na uchochole na hali ya shida na magonjwa katika wananchi wa Tana River. Bwana Spika, na kitu cha kushangaza, ukienda upande wa Bura unapata shida hiyo iko, hakuna maji. Ukija sehemu za Hola ambayo ndio jiji kuu la Tana River hakuna maji. Ukija Garsheni ambao ni moja ya yale majiji makubwa hakuna maji. Garsheni hakuna maji, unakuta watu wanakaa mwezi mzima hakuna maji. Na watu wanakosa maji, kisha bili inakuja ya kwamba ni ulipe maji. Bili inatoka Tawasco, ni ulipe maji na hakuna maji ambao umepata. Bwana Spika, tunataka motion hii ama mswada huu upitishwe na maseneta wote hapa tuunge mkono, ili hii sheria ikipita, magavana wote, sio tu hapa Nairobi ama county ama gatuzi la Tana River, lakini magavana wote wawe wanashurutishwa kutoa ripoti ya hali ya maendeleo ya maji. Bwana Spika, watoto wetu wanapata magonjwa, watoto wetu wanapata shida, wengine wanasumbuka sana. Ukiangalia picha na ukiangalia jioni katika miji yetu mikubwa, gatuzi la Tana River, hata utashangaa kunaendelea nini. Mtoto ameenda asubuhi shule, akirudi jioni, badala ya kwenda kufanya homework, mtoto anachukua geleni, anaanza kusukuma geleni kwa sababu anaenda mtoni kutafuta maji. Achukue maji, asukume geleni mpaka arudi nyumbani, amechoka. Hata huyo mtoto ukisema aende afanye homework, atafanya homework namna gani? Na kitu cha kushangaza ni kwamba Bwana Spika, hakuna sheria ambayo inashutisha governor aje atoe ripoti kuhusu hali za maji katika gatuzi letu. Bwana Spika, mswada huu ukipitishwa, magavana sio peke yake Tana River wataingia na ile shurutisho la kusaidia wananchi. Kweli bwana, tunaona magavana ambao wanamaliza mihula yao, wengine wamefanya muhula mmoja, wengine wamefanya mihula miwili, na ukienda manyumba yao ni ya kifahari, magari ni ya kifahari, maisha yao ni mazuri, lakini Bwana Spika, maisha ya uchochole ya wananchi bado ni yale yale. Hizi vipengele 17 ambavyo tumesema tunataka visaidie wananchi, na hata dunia nzima paka Kenya tumeandikisha, bado tunaona shida ni zile zile. Bwana Spika, tunafurahia sana mswada huu umeletwa sahihi, na utaweka namna ya kupima ili hawa watu ambao wamepata hizi nafasi kupitia kura waweze kufanya haki kwa wananchi wetu. Kwa hayo mengi Bwana Spika, mimi naunga mkono mswada huu. Asante. Thank you very much.
Asante sana Senator Mugatana. Sasa tuende kwake Senator Veronica Nduati.
Honorable Speaker, thank you for this opportunity. And as we continue in the House, Mr. Speaker, I hear the Swahili language is gaining such popularity that the Swahili-speaking senators are close to coming to intimidate those who cannot speak Swahili fluently. We might need to take some classes, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, let me take this opportunity, first of all, to congratulate my friend Senator Catherine Muma for bringing this very important motion to the floor of this House. Discussing and looking at the way forward for a progressive review of the SDG, 17 SDG goals for the nation of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, if you read keenly SDG 1 to SDG 17, they all move into the area of sustainable development, Mr. Speaker. Development that is holistic, development that would be transformative, development that looks into ending poverty, up to the final SDG goal that goes into partnerships, how partnerships for the goals could be achieved, Mr. Speaker. And if I were to start with the SDG number 17, Mr. Speaker, we now cannot doubt how important those partnerships would be for the achievement of the SDG. In spite of the fact that the world transitions from MDGs to SDGs, unfortunately, the attainment of these SDGs has not been very easy for any nation, and neither has it been easy for our country, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because it is easier said than done, Mr. Speaker. This was a global call for action towards improvement and transformation of the citizens of the world. And if I contextualize and look at Kenya, we could say the improvement of the lives of Kenyans. It's a dream. It's a goal. It's a big global goal. I don't know whether it's an illusion, because, Mr. Speaker, we are remaining 7 years before getting to year 2030. when maybe the UN will come back into a conversation around the table to discuss other goals or review those goals. Are we close to attaining those goals as a nation? Maybe we all have the answer that yes, we may have started the journey, but we are not very near to the end of that goal. Mr. Speaker, why could this be? Because if you go to the streets today and ask Kenyans about the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, Mr. Speaker, they may not contextualize it as anything they know of, but we may understand it at our level, having been in Senate or Parliament, or at different levels of education, Mr. Speaker, but the ordinary mwananchi may not understand what the SDG is all about. They understand it in a different context when it comes to the needs of the people. If you talk to them about the food, they may understand it. If you talk to them about water, then they will understand it. So have our nations taken the initiative to help the people understand about the global goals? Once again, maybe that approach was not taken at the initial stage of implementation. But all is not lost, Mr. Speaker, because we have institutions, we have governments, we have county government, we have national government, which is bound by covenants, international covenants, that are supposed to push the implementation of such goals to a level where they can be realized by the citizen, Mr. Speaker. The closest you come to those goals being legislated upon within our laws is maybe in the Constitution. When you go to the Constitution, Article 42, you will find something, an article on every person having a right to a clean and healthy environment, which includes the right to have the environment protected for the benefit of the present and future generation through legislative and other measures. And then we have Article 43, economic and social rights, Mr. Speaker. But if we look, Mr. Speaker, at SDG number 1, no poverty, eradication of poverty, how far have we as a nation walked, Mr. Speaker, towards eradication of this poverty? It means then, Mr. Speaker, that the motion that has been brought to this House is so important, Mr. Speaker, that if these goals were to be pursued both at the national level and at the county level, you might find that the contestations we have today may be a thing of the past. Because a person, for instance, who has means of working towards eliminating poverty in their homes, in their family, in their community, may not have much time to go down to the streets to cause maandamano or to go down to the street to agitate for this or that, Mr. Speaker. So do we then say we need to do much more as counties and national government and to look at how we now monitor the progress towards realization of these goals? My answer would be yes, Mr. Speaker. That if every county were to take up the 17 SDGs, give itself an implementation matrix, Mr. Speaker, though we have 7 years abiding before the lapse of the period within which these SDGs were timed, then we would be making a step towards realization of this goal, of this dream, of this global intention that was put forth. Africa is very well resourced. Our nation is very well resourced. When Africa goes to negotiate or undertake or sign up for such implementation of such goals, how is Africa perceived by the rest of the world, Mr. Speaker? Do we have resources? Are we nations that are able to sustain and push through such goals of eradication of poverty? My answer would be yes. But the negotiation at the global stage sometimes may not be meeting the needs of Africa, and our engagement as nations at international platforms may need to be adjusted fundamentally, Mr. Speaker. Why do I say that? Because, Mr. Speaker, if we were to look at the world planning to have a global call of action towards realization of these goals, and we juxtapose it against the framework, the financial framework that Africa has been subjected to, then you can gauge the clear intention of the world towards Africa, Mr. Speaker. Because if the resources in Africa are being subjected to exploitation without the compensation that would be adequate for those resources, Mr. Speaker, is the world then engaged in ensuring that SDGs can be realized within the continent of Africa? It is a question that we would need as a nation to start thinking about, even in this implementation matrix, so that we can look into the counties as we oversight over the resources in the counties. Look at counties like Kwale with the titanium. Look at counties which are having partnerships with the international community. What kind of a financial matrix are those counties having between themselves and the international community? Or are we negotiating with blind eyes on one edge, and when the international community then comes to the counties, the eyes are opened, maybe by the international communities, and the resources are being carted away, Mr. Speaker, and then we are busy discussing how to realize the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So, Mr. Speaker, in the matrix that has been proposed during the review, Mr. Speaker, a reviewed implementation roadmap, we need to put a customized roadmap, customized implementation roadmap, and a customized monitoring tool that ensures that we are not just looking at documents that are theoretical, documents that are crafted by different communities for their specific needs, and when we come down to the resources that are in our counties, we are allowing those resources to be carted away. Mr. Speaker, I remember when the construction of the superhighway was being done, there was always this allegation, Mr. Speaker, that everything that was scooped from the Thika Road, all the resources that were scooped from Thika Road, were being loaded into containers and shipped out of the country. Are those allegations true? If we cannot take care of the resources that are within our counties and account for those resources, can we then say we are accounting for our states and our nations when we go to international platforms? Mr. Speaker, I have reason to support this motion, very important motion, and I would urge Senator Catherine Muma to consider putting a matrix there that is pushed to an international platform where we now also hold the international community to account on how the resources in the continent of Africa or in the states that are in Africa are being utilized by citizens of the world, so that we are looking at a holistic development that brings about a peaceful community and communities that are at peace with everyone across the globe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Veronica Maina. Next is Senator Tobiko Pelis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for this opportunity, and let me take this first moment to congratulate Senator Catherine Muma for this well thought out motion, which is relevant at this particular time in our country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is true, it's about time that we take stock of our development as a country, particularly in relationship to the Millennium Development Goals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has been on this track of the Millennium Development Goals from 2015-2016 to this moment, Mr. Speaker. And it is good that both levels of government, both the national and the counties, take stock of how far we are, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Sustainable Development Goals were meant to, realize, a better living standards for all, Mr. Speaker, in terms of poverty eradication, economic empowerment, good education, Mr. Speaker, good health services for the people, Mr. Speaker, and even in terms of infrastructural development, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but as Senator Muma has mentioned in the motion, that the country has faced a number of natural, calamities or challenges that may not have been foreseen at the time of, crafting of the development goals. There was the COVID pandemic. We have had long droughts. We have had invasion of the locusts. We have also had, not very restful political moments, Mr. Speaker, including now, Mr. Speaker, immediately after the elections. And all this is time that has gone unaccounted for, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this calls for the attention of all of us, that we take stock. Kenyans were very hopeful by the time, President Kibaki took over as president. And I think President Kibaki tried to put the country on track in terms of achieving and realizing the Millennium Development Goals, Mr. Speaker. The President Kibaki really tried, Mr. Speaker. And Kenyans were hopeful, and we saw a lot of development in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, directing the energies of the country towards, sustainable development. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't know where we came to lose track, because we must have lost track somewhere. Because seemingly we started concentrating on other things. A lot of money went to the counties, which was, the right thing that should have happened. But, Mr. Speaker, the resources that went to the counties today, if audited properly, is not commensurate to the development that we see. Mr. Speaker, I'm always very sad when I go to deep into the interiors of our counties. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I went to bury a good friend, a teacher, who has, contributed a lot in terms of the education in my area, Mr. Joseph Saidimu, and it's sad that we lost him, and may God rest his soul in peace. But, Mr. Speaker, whenever I'm in those roads, I think and I feel pain that, that some parts of our counties don't look like they belong to this country, Mr. Speaker. The roads are terrible, Mr. Speaker. The water provision is at its lowest, Mr. Speaker. So you wonder whether, are we progressing or are we retrogressing? Have the resources that have gone to our counties helped us, or are we still mark-timing on one spot, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, it beats logic. The kind of billions that are mentioned every day in this House that have gone to our counties, yet we do not see commensurate services, Mr. Speaker. In terms of health services, we still have women giving birth in their homes with no birth attendants or with no medical facilities nearby for them to be rushed, Mr. Speaker. So we are losing lives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have faced a long drought, particularly in these ASAL areas. And the drought is back, unfortunately. We've just enjoyed maybe 1 or 2 months of good rains, and it's over, and we are back to a drought again in places like Kajiado, Mr. Speaker. And when you try to see both levels of government, what mitigation measures have been put in place, we do not seem to see what is happening, Mr. Speaker. And so if we do not bring both levels of government to try and take, we do our own audit as a country on what we should have achieved by now, what remains to be achieved, before 2030, so that we bring ourselves back on track, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is high time. Mr. Speaker, we have a road in my place that had a big billboard, that it is a Vision 2030 project. The billboard is wearing out now. That is Isinya Konza. Then, which is also going towards the Konza city, the Technopolis. I don't see much happening in the Technopolis, not a lot. And also for the road, it's still waiting to be tarmacked. Yet 2030 is just at the corner, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so you wonder, these good blueprints, national, global, even county blueprints, we are launching them every day, spatial plans, everything. But are we realizing anything? It leaves a lot of room for us for discussion and for debate and for engagement, Mr. Speaker, to see where are we headed. Are we headed in the right direction? Did we lose track? Can we come back on track in terms of development, and see whether between now, 2023 towards 2030, we have like 7 years to go, what can we salvage within that time, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Kenyans are waiting for us, and there are no other leaders that they are waiting for. It is these leaders who are in this house today, those who are in the executive. It is incumbent upon us, Mr. Speaker, to bring the country back on track, to make sure that we address the poverty levels, we address the cost of living, we address the peace that Kenyans do need and should be guaranteed. We should be, talking to each other. We should be coming to the table, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy that we are here and Catherine Muma is here, and she's not in the street when we are also here engaging each other, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think this is really good, and this is the way we should go, because this is the only time we can move our country in the right direction. Honestly, Mr. Speaker, when we have others in the streets, and we have others, and we have a whole section of us here talking to ourselves, then we are headed separate ways. We cannot be helping the country. I don't think that's the direction to go. The direction to go is to come here. Let's go in the same direction. Let's discuss what Kenya requires, because Kenya belongs to all of us, and we don't have a spare Kenya. We have only one country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really support this motion, and I also support the idea for, audits to be taken both at the county levels and at the national level, and I think the Kenya Kwanza government began very well, Mr. Speaker. When the president engaged all governors, all the 47 in the summit, and they drew a plan on how they are going to move forward, and all the monies for the counties were released. I think there was a lot of goodwill from the president to move this country forward, and I believe we can come back on track, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Senator Tobiko Peris. Next is Senator Okenyuri Esther Anyeni.
Asante sana Bwana Spika kwa nafasi hii, na ningependa kumpongeza seneta mwenzangu Mheshimiwa Catherine Muma kwa kuleta jambo hili la kujadili malengo ya maendeleo endelevu, na pia tukiangalia ruwaza ya mwaka 2030. Mheshimiwa Spika, sijui kama mambo haya yatabakia tu kuwa ndoto Hata ingawaje ningependa kusema kuwa serikali ambazo zimekuwepo zimekuwa zikijaribu kufanya na kutia jitihada kuona kuwa mambo haya yamefanywa kutendeka katika nchi yetu ya Kenya. Nikikumbuka mwaka 2016 nilikuwa bado, nadhani nilikuwa nimetoka chuoni, na mkuu wa Umoja wa Kimataifa wakati huo Ban Ki-moon alipokuwa akitoa ripoti yake, ilionyesha mambo mengi, na haswa kwa nchi hii yetu ya Kenya. Ripoti nyingi zilikuwa zinaonyesha kuwa bado wananchi katika nchi hii wana shida katika sekta ya kilimo, katika mambo ya kupata umeme, katika afya za kizazi, katika elimu. Pengine Mheshimiwa Catherine Muma ambaye amekuja na mjadala huu amepata nafasi njema ya kutukumbusha kuwa sisi kama viongozi tunapotaka kuleta mabadiliko haitachukua siku moja tu, itachukua muda. Na ndio kwa sababu ninapenda kuwakumbusha wale wenzetu wa sehemu ya upinzani kuwa Mheshimiwa Rais William Ruto ameonyesha uweledi na ametia mikakati tofauti tofauti. Kama kwa sasa hivi karibuni tutaona bei ya mambo ya vyakula ikishuka. Ni kwa nini? Kwa sasa wakulima wengi wamepata hii mbolea ya bei rahisi, na hatutaona tena watu wakienda kuandamana kwenye barabara kwa sababu chakula kitakuwa kimekuwa kwa wingi. Hii ni njia moja sehemu tofauti kwenye kaunti zinaweza kuleta miundombinu mbalimbali ili kuhakikisha wananchi kwenye kaunti hizo wanapata vyakula, na wao kama viongozi wajiunge, hata kama uko kwenye sehemu ya ambayo haiko serikalini wakati huu, lakini cha muhimu ni kuangalia wale wananchi ambao wamekupigia kura. Mheshimiwa Spika, ninaunga mjadala huu tena kwa sababu ukiangalia kwa mambo ya kilimo, vijana wa nchi hii hawajakuwa wakijihusisha mno. Pengine hii inatupa pia sura nyingine ya kuangalia ni mambo gani kaunti zetu zinaweza kufanya ili kuwaweka vijana kufanya mipango tofauti kwenye sekta ya ukulima, kwa sababu taifa hili linategemea sana ukulima kulisha wananchi na kufanya biashara. Na pengine vijana wangeweza kuwekwa kwenye sekta hii ya kufanya ukulima, tungeona mabadiliko, kwa sababu hawa ambao ni wakubwa wakati wanatoka, vijana ambao wanakuwa wanafaa kufuata nyayo ambazo zimewachwa na wale ambao walikuwa wanatufuata. Kwa hivyo nimefurahia na hoja hii, na Mheshimiwa Catherine, nimefurahi kuwa siku ya leo umeona ni budi ni heri kutukumbusha kuwa sisi kama viongozi kuna mambo tofauti tunafaa kuyafuatilia, na hii ruwaza ya mwaka 2030 iweze kuwa si ndoto tena, lakini sisi kama viongozi kufanya ionekane kuwa imetendeka. Mheshimiwa Spika, leo nimejaribu kuzungumza kwa lugha ya Kiswahili, pia nikifuata mkondo wa seneta wa Mombasa, Seneta Faki, ambaye alileta kauli hapa juzi. Na sisi tunakienzi Kiswahili. Umoja wa Kimataifa umekipa Kiswahili sehemu ya kipekee. Na mimi kama mtungaji sheria kijana ninashabikia mkondo huo, na sisi kama Wakenya pia tunashabikia mkondo huo. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Spika.
Asante sana Seneta Okenyuri. Seneta Okenyuri, nikiangalia wale seneta wako hapa, Seneta Veronica labda kidogo anaelewa vile umesema, lakini Seneta Catherine Muma hapo naona kweli hata ruwaza mwaka 2030 hajajua ruwaza ni nini. Ni ile Vision 2030 Seneta Muma. Kwa hivyo ningeomba sasa, sababu hakuna seneta mwingine anania ya kuzungumza, nimuite mwenye hii mswanda aweze kujibu sasa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll have you know that in 1985, I was the leading student in the country in Kiswahili, in literature, in Fasihi. But you're right, I have not spoken it, and we need, and congratulations, Senator Esi, you've done us proud. I didn't know you know Kiswahili sumu like that. Honorable Speaker, I rise to reply to this motion. And as I rise, I want to thank every senator who has contributed to this motion. Senator Beatrice Oyomo, who seconded it, Senator Eddie Okech, Professor Kamar, Senator Gerard Kay, Senator Mungatana, Senator Veronica, Senator Okenyuri. You have brought out key issues, and Honorable Speaker, I will request that even as we move with the motion, that all the enriching information will be incorporated so that we redraft it to input what these rich contributions. Mr. Speaker, this motion seeks to help us move from doing cosmetic things in the international arena and bringing back accountability on development back home. Mr. Speaker, even as we speak of SDGs, you will be shocked, but which I think you know but has never thought through, that even as we report internationally on SDGs, we will be reporting on those same issues on other international bodies. The right to health is one of the SDG goals. The right to health is in the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. The right to health is on the African Charter on Human Rights, Human and People's Rights. The right to health is in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. The right to health is on the Convention on CEDAW, on the elimination of discrimination against women. The right to health is in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the executive reports on these different bodies on that right to health. But never do we have we had the executive reporting to the people of Kenya through Parliament, specifically on these issues we are speaking to. Mr. Speaker, if this mechanism is adopted, as colleagues have contributed, we will not only hold them accountable to the ordinary Kenyan, we will also make it easier for the executive to have one report from which they can draw the reports to the different committees in the African region and globally, where they report on these issues. So what we are raising here today, Mr. Speaker, is an important tool that I hope the executive can embrace and the Council of Governors can embrace as an accountability tool. What I have picked, the key issues I've picked from colleagues, is that these will help us to entrench a proper mechanism for measuring development, not just at the county levels, but at the national level. Mr. Speaker, it will also be a good accountability tool so that when we are told a dam is being built and it is going to reform a whole county like we've been told today in Nandi, we will be able to know how much money went into this dam, and after the dam is over, we will be following up to be able to know that before this dam, only 20% of people in Nandi could access water. But now the dam is in place, the relevant connections have been done, now we have moved to 60%. That is how we should be working with this issue. Mr. Speaker, that the ordinary Kenyan will be able to speak to these issues so that we are not using fancy language that can only be understood by the international community. So if we come up with a tool that is clear, when that report is submitted to the Senate about how Murang'a County, how Kakamega County, how Kisumu County have done, then the people of Kakamega, the people of Kisumu are able to share and to be able to follow. But I can assure you the people of Kakamega have no clue what the Kenya government was doing 2 weeks ago in New York reporting on SDGs. I don't even know, as a senator, exactly what they were reporting on the counties that I'm interested in. This mechanism will help us to move from that. Mr. Speaker, the other issues that I have picked, a senator has indicated that we customize this implementation and monitoring so that we first account to ourselves before we account to people out there. And we should come up with a simple matrix that is able to relate to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, there is something called a dashboard through which the country and other countries are supposed to report on SDGs. That dashboard is on a website of the Ministry of Planning. That dashboard is not even accessible to us. So we need to move to a level where we work together in order for whatever reporting mechanism to be a simpler reporting mechanism that can also respond to our issues as the Senate. Professor Kamar also raised the issue of the need for this Senate to be involved in developing these matrices because we have an interest in oversighting development of counties and the national government. And for us to be able to do so, she suggests that as a Senate, we need to take an interest in this issue. Mr. Speaker, therefore, I want to thank my colleagues, I want to thank the House for this opportunity, and I want to request the Secretariat that as we develop this, that we will update this motion because it has been enriched way so much that we should be able now to send it out as a Senate to end up with a tool that will guide our oversight role. I beg to reply.
Thank you, Senator Catherine. I did want to thank you for sitting through as members contributing to this motion. You know, sometimes movers move the motion and then they leave. Then they don't pick the notes or the issues that senators raise. So I want to encourage as much as possible the movers of the motions, bills, to sit through so that they can pick the issues raised on the floor. Honorable Senators, this motion does not involve counties as far as standing under ITA 41 is concerned, ITA 41. And therefore, Honorable Senators, I put the question, aware that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 provides a shared global blueprint aimed at ending poverty, protecting the earth's environment and climate, and ensuring that people everywhere enjoy peace and prosperity. Appreciating that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya started by the official launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in Kenya in 2016, followed by the development of the country SDGs roadmap to guide the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs and the mainstreaming of the SDGs at both the national and the county governments. Concerned that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya has been affected negatively by shocks such as continued drought since 2019 in Kenya and around the world, serious invasion by desert locusts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health calamities, and the current strained state of the Kenyan economy. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with reviewed implementation roadmaps for the two levels of government, taking into account the shocks that have impeded or any other that are likely to impede the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Will as many as of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 10, motion, integration of ethnic minorities and marginalized communities in Kenya.
I can see the move of this motion is not in the House at this hour, so go to the next. Yeah, you know, our new regulations in this House is to drop, because you cannot have motions on the order paper. And then you don't communicate, you don't even maybe give a colleague to move it. So we are forced to drop such motions so that this motion can go back to the queue. And so this motion is dropped.
Order number 11, motion, declaration of cattle rustling as a national disaster and establishment of a special fund for victims.
Again, Senator William Cheptumo is not in this House. Therefore, this motion again is dropped to go back to the queue.
Order number 12, report of the 146th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union and related meetings held in Manama, Kingdom of Bahrain from 11th to 15th March 2023.
This motion, the mover is Senator for Meru Kaduri Murungi, supposed to move this motion. So now that I'm doing another duty here, Senator Mumba, do you feel you can move it? Because you really understand the issues on the IPU. You were in the delegation in Bahrain. Do you have the notes? Maybe we can defer to, maybe if it can appear in the afternoon, I'll support you the notes. Next order.
Order number 13, arbitrary arrests of Kenyan fishermen by Ugandan authorities.
This is a motion. The mover is Senator Dr. Buru Oginga, also not in the House, dropped.
Order number 14, motion, review of the minimum wage necessitated by high cost of living.
The mover is Senator Karen Nyamu, MP, also not in the House, so the motion is dropped. Next order. Honorable Senators, there being no other business on the order paper, the Senate stands adjourned until today, Wednesday, 26th July 2023 at 2:30 p.m.
Sergeant at Arms, kindly ring the quorum bell for 10 minutes.
Well, as directed by the Speaker of the Senate, Honorable Amason Kingi, the quorum bell is currently underway and it will be on for the next 10 minutes. This is according to the House Standing Order, and this is to pave way for various members who may be within the precincts of Parliament but yet to get into the chambers to join the rest for the commencement of the business of the day. So the quorum bell will be on, and this is to alert the members to get into the chambers because the House lacks the requisite quorum, and that it will need the members to, as quickly as possible, get into the chambers for the House business to kick off or to commence. Remember that 15 members are needed in the chambers to enable the House attain its requisite quorum. And as you can see, members are walking in, and we believe that even before the lapse of the 10 minutes, the quorum will have been achieved. The clerk will indicate to the Speaker that the quorum has been achieved, and the bell will stop to enable the commencement of the business. Allow me to hand you over to the live broadcast.
Clerk, proceed to call the first order.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions. Order number 5, papers.
The Chairperson, Standing Committee on Finance and Budget. The Chairperson or any member of that Standing Committee